The castle was illuminated by the rays of the setting sun. In the throne room, the emperor was looking over the documents of the capitulation of the Principality of Shidate. He was pleased with the result. The additional territory beyond the Halrich iron mine was a welcome development. It had been a long-held dream that even the current king's father had failed to realize. The ruler was able to obtain all this thanks to the military merits of the Margrave. And now this valiant military leader, who brought such an important document, was in the sovereign's chamber together with his son. The king praised the Lord for his excellent work. His Majesty was pleased to think about how to reward the commander. The monarch asked the milord about the age of his son. Had his heir not reached marriageable age during the war? The sovereign's question alarmed the Margrave. His son Eric is 24 years old. His Majesty was quite satisfied with the answer. He agreed that this was indeed the ideal age for marriage. The ruler, as a reward, decided to marry off his dearest and most beloved sister to the count's son. The lord was shocked by this news. A hidden princess, whom no one had seen. Rumors were that she was dead and no longer in this world. And the king decided to woo this princess. His grace was amazed. The emperor ordered the maids to bring his sister, whom the inhabitants of the borderland would see for the first time. The princess of the kingdom of Escalier. All the subjects froze in anticipation. The door opened and the girl appeared. The king introduced his sister, whom he treasured most, Misa Escalier. Before the eyes of those present appeared a frightened girl with bare, dirty feet, nervously fiddling with her fair hair. Eric looked closely at his future wife. Her Highness had beautiful eyes the color of the sky. Milady froze when she saw so many people around her. The monarch explained this by the princess's shyness, so he called her to come closer. Misa was confused. Her legs got tangled when she tried to take a step, and the girl fell. His Majesty grinned sarcastically and noticed that Her Highness was a little unwell. The king then told his sister to get up. The Margrave was stunned by the scene that had just taken place, but he pulled himself together and, stuttering a little, declared that it was an honor for his family to welcome the princess. And this creature they call Her Highness. Eric was also glad to greet the noble lady, and he promised to do everything possible not to disgrace his Majesty and his sister. The ruler was amused by this whole situation. He suggested taking a closer look at the one who would soon become the young man's wife. The count's son came closer to the girl and knelt down next to her. The princess looked innocent and sweet in the rays of the setting sun. Eric gently took the princess's hand and brought it to his lips. He said that it was an honor for him to serve Her Highness. The girl pulled her hand away and pressed it to herself. Her eyes were huge with fear. The guy was surprised. The king continued to have fun. He calmed his sister down a little and said that she shouldn't behave like that in front of her future husband. The princess turned around and ran to her brother, where she sat down meekly on the floor near the throne. Her Highness had committed a rude act. The emperor began to stroke his sister's head, saying that she should apologize. The girl tried to say something, but it came out unintelligible. Eric was confused. The carriage, drawn by a pair of beautiful bay horses, rhythmically clattered its wheels along the picturesque road. The Margrave and his wife rode in thoughtful silence. The lord reflected on the battles that had taken place. It had been a long war. The heroes were undoubtedly the Cladnis. However, the king did not like it, so he had thought up this marriage. Late in the evening, already at their family estate, the men of the Cladni family gathered for dinner in the dining room. The lord was beside himself with indignation. He slammed the table in anger. As a reward for their unwavering loyalty, the count's family received only a princess with disabilities. Eric calmly said that they could not refuse the king's order. Therefore, this wedding was inevitable, he added sadly. Even if this marriage was undesirable, then as the young Lord Cladni, he had to fulfill his duties. Cousin Amberic asked what would happen to the engagement with the Crispin family. The lord exclaimed in irritation that his nephew dared to ask such a question. Of course it would be annulled. The Margrave looked at his wineglass with a hopeless expression. This tyrant acts so recklessly. Then he turned to his wife, who was opening the wine. He asked if she was angry, but the woman remembered her audience with the princess's maids. They drank tea and discussed the girl's future stay at the Cladni estate. Milady thought for a moment and did not hear what the women were saying. She asked to repeat it. The maid reminded that the princess should not sleep separately. The countess tried to explain that the bedrooms were connected by a passage, but the maid of honor interrupted and pointed out that Her Highness was unwell, and if something happens to her during the night, it will be a disaster. The second added that the emperor will be furious then. Taliesa was already tired of this conversation. She suggested that servants be appointed then. The maids were furious. How could they trust the princess to some servants? The king would certainly be angry. The noblewoman narrowed her eyes angrily. So they wanted to say? The countess turned to her husband angrily, holding a glass of wine. She was furious that her son had to look after royalty. How dare they order Chladni's heir around? The woman drained her glass. This night was filled with bitterness and resentment for the entire family. But Eric remained calm. At last, the wedding day arrived. The announcement of the wedding between the brave knight, who had returned victorious from the war, and the princess brought a smile to the tired people. The groom rode to the ceremony in a white wedding carriage. It was a quiet, sunny day. People poured out onto the city streets to greet the newlyweds. The courtiers awaiting the ceremony were whispering in the castle. They were looking forward to seeing the princess in person. People were curious about what she had become when she grew up. The gossip was interrupted by the arrival of the margrave. As the lord and his wife walked through the hall, a messenger approached them. Chladni asked menacingly what was going on. The messenger quietly whispered in the earl's ear that His Majesty would not be able to attend the wedding, but Her Highness arrived safely. His Grace clenched his fist in anger. Was the king going to mock him to the very end? He turned abruptly and walked quickly into the ceremonial hall. While waiting for the ceremony, all the guests were asked to take their places. The priest invited the groom to take his place on the pedestal. Milord looked majestic in white wedding clothes embroidered with gold. The front door opened, and the bride entered, supported by her ladies-in-waiting. Immediately, a whisper spread through the hall that the princess was ill or in poor condition. She could barely walk. When the girl took her place next to the groom, the bishop began the ceremony. Having called the newlyweds by name, the priest declared them husband and wife before God, and allowed them to kiss the bride. The guy carefully took Misu by the face and lightly kissed the stunned girl. In the evening after the ceremony, Eric approached the door of the room where his bride was waiting for him. The princess's maids met the milord. The plump maid warned that the boy should not harm Her Highness on their wedding night, and the thin one added that she would come in the morning to confirm that the marriage had taken place. His Grace understood everything. Chladni entered the room and saw his bride in bed, in a state of deep sleep. He approached the bed, taking off his robe. Her Highness's gaze was dull. Moonlight filtered into the bedroom from behind the loosely drawn curtains. Eric stared in confusion at the empty medicine bottles lying on the bed. He didn't understand whether it was medicine or a sedative. This amount would be enough to put a horse to sleep. How could you use a sleeping pill on a person who was on the verge of fainting? Milord looked at Miesa and was shocked by what he saw. The girl's hands were tied to the headboard. The lady herself, in an inappropriate state, was unconscious. Her legs were also fixed. Even prisoners of enemy countries were not treated like that. The Viscount did not understand how it was possible to act like that without any hesitation. Eric clenched his teeth in anger so hard that the muscles in his jaw began to clench. It was unbelievable. Obviously, without the king's order, this was impossible. The man sat down on the bed, trying to free the bride's legs. The room was cool. When he touched Her Highness' feet, he noticed that her body temperature had dropped significantly. The toes had already changed color, and the ankles showed signs of being tied. It was no use asking if the wife was okay. It was obvious that she was not normal. Eric turned his attention to her restrained hands. The princess must be in pain from this. He released her hands. The wrists also showed marks from the restraining tapes. The nobleman took Miesa's hand gently. He noticed that her fingertips were dark red. It was probably from fixation. It would be a problem to leave it like this. The lord saw only one way out. Chladni stood over the half-lying girl. He called her softly. Then he approached the bed, continuing to speak calmly and explain what he would do so as not to frighten the unfortunate girl. His Grace warned that he would lie down next to her for a short time and asked her not to be afraid. Then he began to tell about himself. He gave his name, how old he was, and that he had no brothers. The man then went on to talk about his younger sister, who had died in an accident many years ago. Then, he went on to talk about how he had lived in the Shidate Principality during the war. Eric carefully wrapped his wife in a blanket. He explained that today was their wedding. The girl was completely indifferent. She just lay with half-open, dull eyes and stared at one point. Milord didn't know how much she understood, but it was better to explain the current situation to her. He took the princess's hand in his and began to gently knead her fingers. The Viscount began to explain that winter abroad is quite cold, and frostbite starts from the fingertips. It is very important for the blood to circulate normally throughout the body. The princess fell asleep. His Grace assumed that his wife was feeling better, as her complexion had returned to normal. Perhaps she would recover after sleep. Chladni rose carefully from the bed. Now he needed to create a confirmation of the wedding night. The man looked around, considering what to do. The next morning, the Viscount stood before his maids of honor with bloody sheets. This was proof of the marriage. The maids looked at each other, but promised to pass the certificate on to the bishop. One of the maids noticed that it was time to change Miesa's clothes. Eric stopped at the door. He asked to do it later, since the princess had not yet woken up. The women understood and left with the intention of letting Her Highness rest. Milord remained in the room and looked thoughtfully into the distance. Suddenly, he heard strange sounds, similar to splashing. His Grace looked round and saw that his wife was sitting on the floor, chewing the collar of his coat. He shouted that it was inedible and tried to stop her. "It seems that Her Highness is hungry." Chladni looked around and saw croissants on the table. He quickly took one of them and offered it to the princess instead of outerwear. The girl raised her head and quickly grabbed the bun. Eric watched with interest as his wife greedily devoured the pastry. He was glad that she liked it. By evening, the Viscount and his wife returned to the family estate. Her Highness was accompanied by her ladies-in-waiting. The Margrave and his household came out to meet their relative. His Grace reported that he had brought the princess. The father was not very inspired. He did not understand why everything ended like this. But he suggested that his son first rest from the journey. Suddenly, the maids screamed. Eric's wife was trying to climb the bear monument that stood in the central part of the courtyard. Everyone rushed to her. The maid asked to come down because it was dangerous. His Grace grabbed his wife and took her off the pedestal. He explained to her that it was impossible to climb up there. The Margrave just clicked his tongue in annoyance and left. The Viscount wanted to carry his faithful wife into the house in his arms. But one of the maids of honor asked him to hand the princess over to her. The man replied that he was fine. He noticed that the women were also tired from the long journey, so after they unpacked their luggage, they could retire to rest. The maids, giggling maliciously, said that in that case they would go. On the way home, Eric turned to the butler. He asked him to take care of the princess with care, as she was unwell and today became a member of the Count's family. The majordomo promised to look after Her Highness. The Countess watched with disapproval as her son left with his wife and servants. A little later, the whole family gathered in the dining room for a meal. Misa was also present at the table, and her maid stood next to her. Eric told the women that he would take care of his wife and that they could go and rest. But the ladies-in-waiting objected. They said that everything was fine and that Milady could cause a lot of trouble during meals. The young husband thought about it. He asked if there was any food that the princess did not like. The maids replied that the girl could eat everything. The Viscount picked up a piece of meat with his fork and offered it to his wife to eat. Misa accepted the offered food and began to chew. Then she simply spat out the chewed lump. After that, the girl started screaming, grabbed the plate and threw it, spilling all the food. Eric tried to calm his wife down, but Her Highness went berserk. The maids giggled on the sidelines, and the man tried to find out what had happened. He asked if perhaps she didn't like the food. His Grace held the princess. He turned to the ladies-in-waiting with a request to put his wife in order. The women responded with readiness. When the girl was taken away, young Chladni returned tiredly to the table. The Margrave was angry at the performance that had taken place. He made a sign with his fingers expressing doubts about the advisability of further action. The Countess also responded in sign language that if they did anything against her, their entire family would suffer too. Eric sadly lowered his head. In the kingdom of Esquilier, there are 3 families, which are called pillars. The first family is the Salakez, responsible for the internal stability of the kingdom. Their coat of arms is a snake. The second family is the Crispins. They are responsible for internal security. Their coat of arms is a deer. The third family is the Chladni, responsible for external security. Their coat of arms is a bear. Each of these families had a huge impact on the army and the defense of the kingdom. The previous king, Esquilier, had 3 wives from different families. The first queen was the daughter of Duke Salakes. She bore him Prince Tiran Mermelik II. He did not fulfill his royal duties and established a tyranny. Yet, under the pretext of regaining power, the Salakes family was destroyed by his own hands. Not satisfied with this, he began to oppress the other 2 clans. The 2 remaining families could no longer tolerate the king's oppression. They made a secret pact of succession and planned an uprising immediately after the war ended. But things did not go according to plan. The Chladni family had achieved undeniable success in this war and had gained the sympathy of the people, tired of tyranny. The king could not ignore this situation and therefore married Eric to his sister. After the princess's fit at the table, the family continued eating. The Margrave slammed his fist on the table in anger. She is out of her mind and doesn't even know how to behave at the table. The countess was giving orders to the butler about the people outside. Then, holding a glass of wine, she told about Her Highness. This child had been fine before. They say that the sight of the people suffering in the kingdom brought her to this state. It was a great pity. The elder Chladni was still angry. He rudely asked his wife who she pitied. Then he continued this conversation with his son about the vassals. The feudal lords said that they should put Emberic in Eric's place. Marquis Crispin said that if they wanted an heir to the Chladni family, then they would simply have to remove him. The lord asked his lordship if he understood what that meant, that because of this girl with special health conditions, Eric's position is in danger. The Viscount thought about it. The father continued, "The Grand Duke Hagael has not yet made up his mind. He is so weak-willed. His lordships must have lost their minds along with their manhood. My lord is the king's cousin and the only living member of the royal family other than the princess. It was necessary for the coup d'état to be recognized as legitimate. The lord became incapacitated due to an accident and cannot have children. His life is close to seclusion." Chladni cursed and slammed the table, nearly knocking over his glass of wine. The father was angry that nothing was going according to plan. The count became nervous and left the dining room. While pouring a glass of wine, Taliesa asked her son what he thought about the 2 families uniting. Eric replied that it was impossible from the start. When the king's eyes are open, there is no need to attract attention and arrange a wedding. Without a clear successor to the throne, convincing the nobility can take years. The daughter of a marquis cannot remain unmarried for long. The countess thought about it. It seemed that her husband's political instincts had become dulled by his long time on the battlefield. In a situation that even a young man could understand, he was proposing to get rid of this child. The Viscount, taking a sip of wine, remarked that he had to assess the situation first. Milady noted that this was her son's nature. It was good when the maids did not criticize him, but this girl... Taliesa asked Eric not to get attached to the princess. Male sympathy is superficial, and the lady does not think that her son is any different. If this kindness had to be paid for, it would be better not to show it at all. The countess thought for a moment and asked not to torment this poor child. Late in the evening, the Viscount walked through the corridors of the castle. He wondered if his mother also wanted to get rid of the princess. The image of the fragile and defenseless Misa on her wedding night appeared before him. His Grace's thoughts were interrupted by a cry from behind the half-open door. He listened. A woman's voice loudly commanded him not to dawdle and to go quickly to bed. A second voice echoed and hurried him. The ladies-in-waiting were talking. The plump one didn't understand what was wrong with the princess today. She couldn't calm her down. The thin one answered that the lady had probably eaten a lot today. That's why she had a lot of energy. Then they began to discuss the expressions on the faces of the count's family during the girl's attack. The women found it amusing. It was incredible. The Viscount entered the room. He heard a few words at the door. His Grace told the maids that they had worked hard and that he would now take care of his wife himself. Eric couldn't imagine how Miesa had been treated so far. He had released the women for today. They frowned with displeasure and said they would come tomorrow morning to wake Her Highness. The man stood in the middle of the room and looked at the girl sitting quietly on the bed. She was slowly fingering her long, fair hair. His Grace decided that his wife was in a good mood. The heir sat down next to her on the bed. He calmly began to talk to the princess and tell her that she was now in the capital's Clodny estate. Now Her Highness would travel back and forth between this estate and the Clodny territory. The husband hoped that his wife would like it. When Eric arrived, it seemed to him that their eyes met. But Mieza quickly lost interest. Then His Grace noticed that the girl's feet were bare again and that her dress was from yesterday. He was surprised and expressed dissatisfaction. Doesn't his wife have other clothes? This one looks like a prison uniform. The princess turned her attention to the man. She looked at him with her huge blue eyes. Her Highness was quite nice. Then the wife reached out a little towards the Viscount, muttered something and spat in his face. Eric recoiled in surprise. He began to wipe his face and calmly told his wife that it was wrong to spit in people's faces. His Grace gently stroked the girl's back. He suggested that she rest, and when he finished his work, he would lie down too. And before finally leaving, the husband asked to call him if anything was needed. Seriously, what was he thinking about? The princess looked thoughtfully after her husband. It was late at night, and the room was lit only by moonlight. Eric was sleeping on the bed next to his wife. Suddenly, a flash of lightning cut through the clear sky. Misa opened her eyes, glowing with an unnatural light. The next morning was surprisingly sunny and bright. Only the Viscount and his wife were having breakfast in the dining room. Several servants stood nearby to help. Eric tried to feed the princess and made casual conversation. He asked how Miesa had slept the night before. Perhaps it had been uncomfortable because the bed was different. The girl was gnawing on a whole loaf of bread and did not react to her husband's words at all. The man was holding a spoonful of soup. He noticed that his wife's complexion was worse than usual, although she looked fine before going to bed. His Grace tried to feed the girl some soup again. He kindly suggested that she eat something liquid, even if she had no appetite, just to gain strength. Suddenly, Her Highness dipped her hand into the bowl, splashing some of the soup. Then, taking all the food she could find in her fist, she put it in her mouth and began licking her fingers. The Viscount was somewhat taken aback. After the princess arrived at the mansion, several days passed at a frantic pace. After the young master's wedding, the environment in the estate changed inexorably. The warriors were in the middle of their morning training when Eric appeared on the parade ground. The men all welcomed their captain back. It seemed like everyone wanted to say something. A heavy atmosphere hung in the air. The commander barked at his subordinates for standing there like a pillar. Was today's training already over? The soldiers answered in unison that it was not, and continued to actively practice with their swords. The Viscount watched his soldiers training. No one dared to express their displeasure to Eric. He always looked calm and unwavering, as if nothing had happened. For some reason, the Margrave began to avoid family dinners. Lady Clodny expressed her displeasure, saying that he could not control his emotions. And the vassals of the clan were completely confused. After preparation, His Grace walked through the corridors of the estate, drying himself with a towel. He asked the butler where his wife was. The major domo replied that the lady had been out exploring the area that morning and was now in the maid's workroom. The Viscount was surprised to see her there again, so he went to check. In the servants' room, the maids sat around the sleeping princess. The girl lay on a pile of maid's clothes on the floor. The maids thought that Her Highness liked it here, because she slept soundly and never woke up. It must be because of the softness of so many clothes. The women wondered if it was okay to lie on their clothes like that. The clothes were washed, but they were wearing them. Then the conversation turned to my lady's beautiful hair. It shone better than gold. When the young gentleman entered the room, the women quickly jumped up. The milord asked about the princess's maids of honor. The maids replied that they had left again, so they were looking after the lady. The maids said that they had notified the countess through the butler that Her Highness was here. The maids laid her down on their clothes because the floor was hard and cold. Eric praised the women for their help and sent them off to work. Now he would take care of his wife. His Grace picked up the sleepy princess in his arms, intending to carry her to the master's quarters. As soon as the Viscount entered the bedroom, Miesa woke up. She was scared, started screaming, and trying to break free from her husband's embrace. The man tried to carry her to the bed. The Lord calmed her down and asked her to wait until he let go of Her Highness. Otherwise, she might fall, and it would hurt. Finally, Eric lowered his wife onto the bed. The girl immediately jumped to the other end of the bed. After observing the princess for a few days, His Grace began to think that she did not like him very much. For some reason, his wife considered him a means of transport. Miesa came down from the other end of the bed and, staring at one point, chewed her hair. The Viscount noticed a thread in her hair. He reached out to remove the excess, but the girl instantly shrank. The man spoke calmly to his wife, explaining that he had not meant to frighten her. He simply wanted to remove the debris from her hair. After throwing away the fibers, Eric sat down next to her. He wondered why the princess was so frightened. Her Highness, noticing that she was not in any danger, relaxed and opened up. The Viscount remembered the words of one of the maids. She had once seen a similar cat, and it was white. The gentleman thought about it. Late at night, when Miesa was asleep in her bed, the Viscount was in the study corner of the bedroom, looking over documents. Candles illuminated the desk and a pile of documents with sealed letters. Eric began to read one of the documents with the coat of arms, which spoke of Malik and Dial. Then he thought about the current situation in the estate. The Viscount was wary of the royal ladies-in-waiting. They leave the princess every time and disappear at every opportunity. The maids are clearly up to something. His Grace clutched his head. Besides, he was worried about the food supply for the inhabitants of the territories. There was too much to settle. The Viscount took one of the sealed letters and opened it. This was the report. As a result of surveillance on the man at the direction of my lord, it was confirmed that they had another meeting in that house on the outskirts. That woman from the tavern was with the head of Chladni. Eric was lost in thought. When his father suddenly began discussing marriage with the Crispin family, his lordship was the only one at the time who had any suspicions. Looking back, the Viscount knew he had been right. To the knights and vassals, Chladni's proposal did not seem like a bad idea. But for some reason, my lord could not get rid of his anxiety. So he carefully watched his father from that day on. From this, he learned that a certain woman from the tavern often visited his father's chambers. At that moment, Eric was confronted for the first time with his parents' misdeed. It left a bitter taste in his mouth, but between life and death on the battlefield, he could not bring it up. His Grace tried to find out if this woman had ulterior motives or patrons, but found nothing important. So he decided to keep it to himself for now. But after the war ended, the Count dragged this madam here. He even ordered his right hand, Sir Kelbanning, to take her as his second wife. That's how devoted Chladni was to her. The young gentleman had no choice but to tell his mother this discreetly, sending proof by letter. And in today's reply from Adele's maid, he learned that the Countess did not want to hear about it. Taliesa considered herself no longer young, and it did not matter to her if her husband slept with another woman. It was even much better for her Grace not to see his face every morning. Eric continued reading the report. It said that if the mistress were an aristocrat, it would be easier to find out about her past. But this woman has no connections, except for the former Captain Kelbanning, who sometimes comes to this house. There are no other visitors. The Viscount threw the letter. It seems there is no new information, His Grace considered. In truth, the Countess's reaction was quite natural. Even she had regarded her marriage, at best, as a relationship between partners for the creation of a family. The princess awoke in the moonlight. She sat up in bed and began to sleepily rub her eyes. Noticing the light in the corner of the room, Her Highness moved toward her working husband. Eric noticed his wife wandering around. He turned to the girl and suggested that she lie back down. Perhaps she needed something. Misa walked around the table and approached her husband. His Grace called his wife back. She touched the man and then climbed onto his lap. The Viscount was stunned. The princess began to touch the documents lying on the table with her hand. The husband, deciding to satisfy the girl's curiosity, let her take a closer look at the note. He noted that perhaps it would not be very interesting to her. Her Highness looked at the written paper with interest, and then began to slowly tear off pieces. Eric relaxed. His wife, who had always avoided him, approached him for the first time. And he did not feel guilty. His Grace simply observed the princess's actions. Due to unexpected events and his dissatisfaction with the king, The Viscount had not yet thought that he would spend the rest of his life with this man. When young Chladni first encountered knighthood as a child, it filled him with a sense of responsibility and even pride. But reality quickly shattered that dream. As nice as it sounds, it is ultimately a blood pact with the family. Essentially, the heir becomes the breeding stallion for the next generation, so the Viscount did not expect much from the woman who would become his wife, even if she liked to tear paper into pieces. It didn't matter. To be more precise, after realizing his position and responsibility as an heir, His Grace did not place great hopes on a relationship with a woman. At this point, Miesa became interested in the colorful coat of arms on the document. She made a sound and reached for it. Eric held his wife's hand and said that was enough. He took the manuscript and held it up. The wife reached out her hands to the treasured piece of paper, making strange sounds, but the milord said that it could not be torn. Pestering would not help, since he had not yet finished reading the document. On a sunny morning, the Countess was looking through her correspondence while drinking tea. The maid noticed that it was almost March. She suggested that a large brazier be prepared in the greenhouse for the upcoming concert. Taliesa, reading the letter, agreed and said that it would be good to prepare a small brazier in advance. This year it is colder than usual. Then Miesa ran into the room, followed by a maid of honor, who asked her to run more slowly. Her Excellency was not pleased with the guest. The daughter-in-law caught her foot on something, lost her balance, and fell flat on the carpet. The Countess sadly noted the arrival of the princess. The lady narrowed her eyes. How unusual. Usually, Her Highness stays with the maids, but today she came to her mother-in-law. Adele exclaimed, as Milady called her daughter-in-law a princess, as if she were a stranger. Taliesa did not emphasize this. She still did not know how to address her. The Countess turned to the lady-in-waiting Dyla. She had been on the border for so long that she was not familiar with court etiquette. How should Her Grace address the princess in this case? The maid remained silent. Milady did not know what to think. Not only were these ladies-in-waiting useless, but they did not even try to get along with others. The maid turned to the mistress. She had learned that 3 generations ago there had been a similar situation. The head of the family, Edward and his wife, addressed the princess by name, since their son had introduced her as his wife. The mother-in-law suggested that perhaps she should call her daughter-in-law by her name. She remembered that the princess's name was Miesa. The Countess called the girl's name. The royal person looked up and sat up. Her Highness began to smile sweetly, and then plopped back down on the floor. Milady smiled. The princess allowed her to call her by her name. It is very beautiful. The maid of honor admitted that her daughter-in-law liked her mother-in-law. She asked the lady to take care of the girl until dinner. She naturally agreed and let Diala go. The maid apologized and left. The maid complained that the king's servants were always picky about something. Taliesa thought about it. She had heard that Madame Diala was lounging around all day, but still bathed her mistress regularly. And Madame Malika was never seen in the vicinity of the estate. There must be a reason for their blatant laziness. The princess concentrated on running her finger over the patterns of the carpet. The mother-in-law continued to think, they don't know yet what the ladies-in-waiting can hang on them. And that worries them most of all. My head hurts. The Countess called her maid and asked her to bring her headache medicine. It should be in her bedroom. Adele sent the maid. When the servant brought a tray with medicines and tea, the chambermaid asked if it was the right medicine. The worker confirmed, yes, it was the one by the bed. Miesa was sitting at Milady's feet. Adele brought a tray into the room and placed it on the table next to the sofa. She was surprised to see that the lady allowed her daughter-in-law to lie down on her lap. The maid asked if the mistress was okay, as she was still clutching her head. The servant suggested calling a doctor if the pain was too severe. Taliesa was interested in Her Highness's age. The girl was rumored to be about 20 years old. The chambermaid confirmed this. Her Grace had heard that at a young age, the princess had witnessed the destruction of more than half the royal family. It must have been so painful that it affected the mind. The lady stroked the royal person's head affectionately. Even now, this poor thing is used left and right. Adele tried to address the mistress, but she continued to speak. She called Miesa a beautiful child. Her features and eye color were very attractive. Milady asked the maid to make sure the child was eating well. When the princess raised her head and looked at her mother-in-law, she could see the color of her eyes. After all, she had a shock of hair on her head, because of which her face was not visible properly. Come to think of it, the color of her highness's eyes seemed familiar. The countess decided that she needed to trim her daughter-in-law's nails and comb her hair. The maid wondered if perhaps the mistress remembered her dead daughter when she looked at the princess. Eric was looking for his wife. A servant informed him that her highness had spent the entire morning with Lady Chladni. The man became interested and went to his mother's sitting room. Voices could be heard from behind the half-open door. Miesa was lying on the sofa, and women were bustling about near her. The maid offered to cut the girl's nails, but Taliesa did not agree. She thought it would be better for her to finish it herself, since she had already started. Milady held her daughter-in-law's leg and carefully trimmed her nails with scissors. Besides, sudden touches could frighten the princess. Adele tried to object. Entering the room, the Viscount found the women doing this. He was surprised and asked what they were doing. The mother was holding his wife's leg with one hand and had a pair of scissors in the other. His Grace once again inquired what was going on. As soon as he entered the drawing room, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The Countess became embarrassed. She said that she had been cutting Miesia's nails. Her Highness thought the girl was uncomfortable during her walks. Eric was very surprised. His mother was cutting someone's nails. It was unusual for her to take care of someone like that. She might usually have a little sympathy, but cutting nails was unheard of. Even with her own son, Madame Chladni was always rational. But now the Countess looks at the princess with a tenderness that is hard to believe. That expression on her mother's face was reserved for one person only, for her younger sister Rosie. Perhaps the woman was projecting memories of her daughter onto her daughter-in-law. Eric came closer to the ladies. He asked for the scissors so he could finish the procedure himself. Taliesa said that everything was fine, and she would finish it herself. But her son was persistent and took the scissors. He was unsure whether he could leave things as they were, or whether he should intervene. The reason for his growing anxiety was the intrusive memory of his mother's behavior on the day of Rosie's death. The Viscount took his wife's foot in his hand and began to carefully trim her nails. Misa was calm and behaved well. Suddenly, her face changed. The princess frowned and clenched her robes into fist. Perhaps she felt uncomfortable or scared. Adele was alarmed by the girl's change in mood. She noticed the cookies on the tray out of the corner of her eye and immediately shoved one into her highness's mouth. The royal person immediately calmed down. Everyone was surprised and asked what the maid did. The woman replied that she noticed that the princess seemed uncomfortable. When the mistress combed her daughter-in-law's hair before, she also made a fuss. And after the maid gave her something sweet, Milady calmed down. It seems that Miesa likes sweets. Eric looked at his wife. Taliesa noticed how carefully the girl ate, how she bit off pieces. The Viscount agreed that his wife enjoyed sweets. The Countess was glad that she ate well. In the evening, the young gentleman dined with his wife. He fed her with a spoon and asked her to chew it thoroughly and not to swallow it just like that. He thought about his mother's reaction to the princess. The Viscount did not understand what exactly the Countess had seen that had brought back memories of her dead daughter. The girl had gotten dirty while eating, and the man had wiped her off with a towel. Perhaps the eye color is similar to Rosie, but Cousin Amberic also has blue eyes. However, her Grace never treated him especially. He still did not understand. The butler brought the roast quail and apologized for the delay in serving the dish. The lord asked for the plate to be placed on the table and dismissed the servant. When the couple dines alone, Miesa behaves calmly. Perhaps this dish will not be too difficult. Suddenly, her highness closed her eyes, covered herself with her hands, and began to make sounds of anxiety. The Viscount was surprised. He did not understand what had happened. She must have become ill. The princess continued to worry and began to point to the dish with the quail. The husband asked if he should remove it. The wife tensed up even more. It was strange. The maid said that she didn't have any food she didn't like. Eric took the dish from the table and gave it to the maid. The girl immediately relaxed. His Grace was tormented by the question of what was going on. Perhaps his wife had had a bad experience with quail. On a sunny spring day, the maids were sewing in the attic workroom. At the same time, they kept an eye on the princess. The girl was sorting through the threads of yarn lying on the floor. One of the maids asked the young lady to get up from the cold floor. But Her Highness did not react to the woman's words at all. Then the worker brought a blanket and spread it on the floor under the lady. She sat down next to her, telling Miesa to always lie down on a soft cloth. Then she began asking how she felt better. Perhaps she wanted to sleep or needed to be covered. The workers began to talk among themselves about this maid. They did not understand what she was muttering under her breath, and they were sure that the mistress was unlikely to understand either, although others admitted the possibility that she did. The women noticed that the young lord always spoke to those who did not understand him, and he carried his wife in his arms everywhere. And he treated her so carefully, her feet never touched the ground. Isn't it strange for someone who has never been interested in women to care about someone like that? The other maid tensed up. She didn't like the way the master was spoken about. Isn't it good that the young owners have such a close relationship? There is no need for this negativity. The woman began to justify herself, but others warned that if the worker did not want to be thrown out, she should watch her words. Even the walls have ears. Soon the first maid returned to the ladies, and everyone fell silent. The girl asked what they were talking about, but the others waved her off. The maids noticed that it would be nice for the princess to wear nicer clothes, but her clothes get dirty quickly, especially when she eats. Then one of the women suggested making a bib for the lady. The others happily took up the idea. Various suggestions about embroidery, flowers, and patterns poured in, but there were a few maids who did not like the idea. The sun was already at its zenith. The training was in full swing. Eric, monitoring the process, looked up at the sky. He noticed that lunchtime had long passed. His thoughts returned to his wife. She had looked weak this morning. The Viscount did not understand what was wrong with her. Perhaps Miesa was not eating well, so he suggested that they finish training for today. Having thanked the soldiers for a good workout, His Grace headed for the castle. On the way, he could not stop thinking about his wife. On her first morning here, she looked very weak and spent the whole day in her room. The man was interested in whether the princess had a good time with the maids today, whether she had dined. He was not sure that he could entertain his wife as the servants did. His Grace tidied himself up after his physical exertions and called the butler to report on Her Highness's day. The major domo replied that she was in the maid's room. Before dinner, the mistress fell into a stream in the garden. After that, the lady changed her clothes, ate, and took a nap. Eric was indignant when he heard about the pond. The servant explained that when Her Highness was walking to the chapel with the countess, she saw fish in the water. She went up to take a closer look and fell. The Viscount calmed down a little. Since his wife was with his mother, it wasn't very dangerous. It seemed Miesa had been quite busy all day. The butler noticed that the chapel was not very pleasant for the young lady. His Grace agreed that it was a dull place for his wife, as she could not sit still for long. The major domo continued that at first the princess followed her ladyship calmly, but as soon as they entered the sanctuary, the girl began to worry at the entrance, so the lady remained outside with the maid. Eric assumed that if there were sweets, his wife would like it, so he asked the servant to make sure that there were always treats on the table and that they never ran out. The couple met for dinner in the dining room. Miesa devoured the food with pleasure. His Grace was pleased with his wife's good appetite. Her Highness was swinging her legs under the table with satisfaction. It seemed to the Viscount that she was quickly regaining her energy. Maybe she had just had a day off yesterday. Milord continued to feed his wife. He suggested eating vegetables, not just meat. Having stabbed the food with a fork, Eric asked the girl to open her mouth. He tried to put food in her mouth, but one piece fell on her dress. The princess noticed this. The husband tried to remove the piece from her clothes, but the lady got there first. Miesa brought the piece to her lips with the intention of eating it, but the Viscount managed to snatch the food from her hands. The girl reached for it with her mouth open. His Grace tried to stop his wife, promising to cut off a new portion. But this cannot be eaten. His wife did not listen to him. The lady grabbed her husband's wrist, which held the treasured slice. Then she put it in her mouth along with her fingers. Eric managed to pull his hand away. He did not understand why the princess was so stubborn. Her Highness froze in surprise. Then her features changed. She got angry and grabbed the tablecloth. All the food flew off the table after the lady pulled the cloth. The lady in waiting was surprised by the noise in the dining room and looked inside. The spouses were sitting opposite each other, all covered in food remains. A plate was on the head of the royal personage. The maid came in and took Misa with her. She thought, "Isn't it tiresome to spend every meal like this?" Diala hurried the princess, who was covered in sauce. The Viscount was upset. Late at night, already lying in bed next to his washed wife, Eric tried to sort out the complete mess in his head. He still felt the warmth of his wife's mouth on his fingers. Even though she is his wife, she is no different from a child. She may not even realize that he is her husband. Therefore, she is not someone he can consider romantically, ever. The next day, the newlyweds were drinking tea with the countess in her drawing room. Misa was lying on the sofa, her head on her mother-in-law's lap. Taliesa was stroking the girl's hair. Milady's maid stood nearby. Adele reminded the gentleman that there would be a poetry evening on Wednesday. Her Highness expressed concern that the princess might be frightened by the large number of people. Eric asked how necessary it was to be there. Mother confirmed that it was necessary, because everyone, like predators, would be looking for prey, so it was necessary to show that Chladni was doing well. A poetry evening sounds grand, but in reality, it is a meeting where matriarchs of like-minded families gather once a month to discuss the corruption of the royal family and houses. This is a good place to gather the necessary information. This time, it is time for the Chladni house to hold a meeting. Because of this, the castle has been busy preparing the greenhouse for several days. More importantly, the Marchioness Crispin and her only daughter, Lakeen, were expected to attend the gathering. As this was the first meeting between the two families since the broken engagement, it was of interest to everyone. Although there was no question of blaming anyone for the broken engagement, it was clear that both families would be uneasy. Continuing with tea, the Countess invited her daughter-in-law, who was munching on cookies, to look at the greenhouse, which was almost decorated for the event. The Viscount asked if Misa had had fun today. Her ladyship laughed. The son spoke as if he were asking the nanny about his daughter. She confirmed that the girl had had a good time. Then her grace suggested that the heir should check on the preparations for the winter garden. But Eric refused, citing work. He took a break for tea to visit his wife, but after thinking about it, he agreed. A few days before the meeting, the servants finished preparing the winter garden. Tall candelabra with candles were placed along the paths. The hall was additionally decorated with flowers. The maids were turning to the countess for final instructions. The princess was walking around the greenhouse in a new dress, admiring the flowers. She looked like a little child. The young gentleman watched his wife. The sight of Misa's childlike spontaneity calmed him. It seemed to his grace that his heart had relaxed a little. Her Highness was looking at the flowers when the seamstresses approached her joyfully. They were holding a cage with a bird. The girl had not entered the workroom for some time, so the women were glad to see her. When Milady turned to face the workers, her eyes widened at the sight of the cage. It was not the cage itself that alarmed the young lady, but the bird in it. A semi-dark room filled with flying birds, feathers, traces of a struggle appeared before my eyes, and outside the window, rain was pounding and flashes of lightning were visible. The princess began to feel as if the dove was telling her that her mother had made a mistake. Even if it was her mother, she would be punished if she made a mistake. So perhaps now... The huge bird chirped loudly. Mieza covered her face and screamed. She fell to the floor and curled up into a ball in hysterics. Everyone around was surprised and shocked. Eric rushed to his wife, shouting her name. Running up to his wife, the Viscount carefully lifted her up and asked her to lean on him. The girl was sobbing. The husband tried to find out what had happened, but no one could explain. Suddenly, Her Highness turned and threw herself on the Lord's neck, hugging him tightly. The man still wanted to understand what had happened. One of the ladies in waiting remarked that it was probably a reaction to the bird. The husband was surprised. The maid confirmed that the princess was afraid of birds. And it was not just a fear of birds. Milady always had a peculiar character. The countess was indignant. She thought the maids should have told her about it beforehand. Adele added that there was no point in going all the way to the border if they weren't going to talk about anything. The ladies in waiting grimaced. They bathed and dressed the royal person every day. And then they forgot to tell one thing, so there was a terrible noise. Talisa was furious. Miesa was sobbing in her husband's arms. Eric wrapped his wife in his jacket and picked her up. He decided to take her outside to calm her down a little. Yet, The girl calmed down next to her husband. She shivered, wrapping herself in her jacket and pressing herself tightly against his chest. The Viscount finally understood why the princess did not want to eat the roast quail. The young gentleman promised that from now on there would be no birds on the table or in the greenhouse either. His Grace suggested going into the garden. The lord headed for the garden swing under the crown of a large tree. Perhaps the wife felt trapped within four walls all this time. Come to think of it, except for that time when Mother took Miesa to the chapel, the girl spent every day inside the castle. Eric sat down on the swing, still holding his wife in his arms. He began to rock rhythmically, calming Her Highness and wiping away the almost dried tears. He promised to chase away all the birds that would fly in. The sun's rays penetrated through the dense foliage, warming the vacationers. A light rocking calmed and relaxed Milady. She began to doze. The Viscount promised to carry her to her room if his wife fell asleep. Amberek found such a peaceful picture. He was looking for a relative. The cousin was a little surprised that Eric was walking with his wife and assumed that they were very close. Amberek approached the newlyweds who were resting. He asked his cousin if his wife was asleep. The Viscount told the guy to disappear. The guest leaned against the swing. The relative feigned indignation at the rude answer. Another Claudiny specified that perhaps Eric was afraid that the princess would wake up, and then he added that there were many rumors about the couple, which had already reached his house. Since the uncle is currying favor with other family members to make his son the heir to the family, rumors that are spread outside cannot be taken lightly. The Viscount asked who it was this time. It was one of his lordship's maids, Bina, a redhead from the capital. She had recently been hired. Apparently, she and another servant with brown hair were telling tall tales everywhere. However, Amberek, who prefers freedom, does not want to be the heir. He trusts Eric since they fought on the battlefield. The relatives trusted each other with their lives and shared everything. The cousin had long supported the lord in his fight against his uncle, his father. The Viscount thanked his friend for the information. The boy settled down on the thick grass nearby. The brother replied that there was no need for thanks, since he had been enjoying himself at his cousin's expense for the last few days. What was more important was what had happened to Eric. The young master did not understand what was being said. Amberek asked his cousin if he was truly enchanted by his wife. It was said that his Grace personally cut her nails. The husband replied that he could not stand aside while his mother did all this. The guest thought about it. It may be true, but seeing the Viscount today, one gets the feeling that it is not just too much, but too much. The heir clarified what his brother meant. The relative replied he had heard that the princess's feet did not touch the floor. They say that Eric never lets her out of his arms. The lord objected that it was obvious how difficult it was for her to walk. Besides, the cousin did not know how Miesa could behave. A man could not drag her around like the maids had done today. The cousin did not understand the reason for his brother's behavior. He probably does it for the sake of the family. Based on all practical considerations, a sense of responsibility, and even sympathy, he still could not understand. Amberek stood up and began to walk nervously back and forth, thinking. When he heard the rumors, he simply thought that his relative had decided to put on a brilliant show to deceive the king. But there's no one here now, so why go so far? Does the Viscount really want to live with such a woman? Eric asked him to shut up, but there was no stopping his cousin. He asked because he had no idea what his brother was thinking. Wouldn't it be more logical to get rid of his wife as soon as possible? The heir had almost married Lakeen until this misfortune came. The lord barked that enough was enough. As long as Miesa's adoption into the family was beneficial to them, that was all that mattered. The king would leave the family alone. There was nothing better than that now. It was inevitable, but the best choice. And yet, the princess knows nothing. She doesn't even know whose lap she's sitting on, or how she's being treated. Why make her even more miserable? Everyone already treats the lady like the plague. A few days later, the poetry evening arrived. One after another, the ladies allied with the Claudiny family arrived at the greenhouse, including the mother and daughter of the Crispin family. After everyone had taken their seats, Eric and his wife came in briefly to greet the guests. In an instant, dozens of glances fell on them, and insincere congratulations became a pleasant bonus. Throughout the meeting, the awkward atmosphere between the Claudiny and Crispin families was noticeable to everyone. but everyone pretended that it was not so. After staying with those present for a while, the Viscount, lifting Miesa into his arms, decided to take his leave. He apologized that they would have to leave first, since his wife was unwell, and he wished them to continue enjoying the meeting. His Grace Lacane's quick departure did not please her very much, so she caught up with the couple on the street. Eric asked what was the matter. The girl wanted to say something. The man remarked that it was foolhardy to go off like that for a private conversation. A female figure was hiding behind the trees. Miss Crispin promised to be brief. The guest was pretty and red-haired. She hid a handkerchief behind her back. Then she looked strangely at His Grace, asked him not to have children, said goodbye, and left. The Lord was left perplexed. A little later, the Crispin ladies were leaving the estate in a carriage. Madame was interrogating her daughter. She asked if she had left the handkerchief as planned. Lacane confirmed it. Then the mother asked if the miss had properly conveyed the message to the Viscount. The girl again confirmed it. The Marchioness noticed how happily the spouses were embracing each other. It was disgusting. Then the women began to discuss the princess. In the end, the missus concluded that it was her daughter who had to join this family. Only then could they get the treatment they deserved. It could be said that Lacane was raised for the inheritance, taught nothing but the virtues of a housewife. But the young lady disagreed. Late in the evening, Eric tried to do some paperwork at his desk, but he couldn't get his thoughts together. His brain had been overloaded lately. On the one hand, a father who was carried away by his mistress and neglected family affairs. Soon, most of the family affairs fell on the shoulders of the heir. On the other hand, there was a shortage of food due to the prolonged war, which led to significant human and property losses among the population. If they can survive this summer, the soldiers who return to their fields will harvest the crops and the situation will stabilize. Considering the Chladni family played a huge role in the recent war, they deserved enough compensation to avoid these problems. However, the king's reward for the family was a few minor war trophies, the Halgrich iron mine, donated for public display, and a lonely princess. The mine will take years to develop, which won't help with the current food shortage. The main thing is to figure out how to use what we have now to buy food. Since the king turns a blind eye to this, the family must provide for itself. And it is not a matter of finances. The main problem is that the absence of the count forced the vassals to look for a leader in Eric. The sudden responsibility and high expectations from everyone were much more painful than the Viscount had thought. It was like a coffin that weighed down on him. Miesa woke up and went to see her husband. His Grace noticed that his wife had begun to wake up at night often lately. The girl came closer and pulled the man by the sleeve. This brought Eric out of his reverie. He apologized and asked if she wanted to come with him. The princess immediately climbed onto her husband's lap and hugged him around the neck. The Viscount briefly thought of Amberic's face, filled with incomprehension. Indeed, it was difficult to understand. Even the man himself did not understand. He silently embraced the princess. The girl pulled back a little and reached for the candy in a jar that was on the table. The husband opened the container and gave Misu a candy. Whatever it was, he hoped it would stay a little longer. The very fact that Her Highness did not run away, but remained in Eric's arms, brings inexplicable consolation to his troubled heart. 5 women of the Crispin family stood before the Countess in her chambers. Milady wanted to know what was going on. The ladies reported that the young miss had dropped her handkerchief a short time ago. In high society, a handkerchief is exchanged between a man and a woman as a sign of love. For an unmarried lady, leaving this thing in the house of her former fiancé, now a married man, is a very serious problem. Her Highness ordered that the maids also help look for this scarf. And to avoid rumors, it is worth saying that this accessory belongs to the Marquise. A large number of women were combing the estate. In the far corner of the yard, near the working stove, the main woman of those who arrived was meeting with Malika. She gave the order to the lady-in-waiting to deal with this woman within 2 years. The maid sneered that if necessary, she could deal with her tomorrow. The lady replied that it was not something that could be done so easily. Besides, they needed to be in touch. She could not come up with reasons for visiting the Count every time. Then the skinny one suggested meeting in the city. She could very well go out. The brunette needs to choose a time and place for the next meeting, and Malika will try to come. Taliesa was in her living room, combing her daughter-in-law's hair. She asked the girl to be calm at dinner tonight, as the family would be together for the first time in a long time. The princess chewed on her napkin. The countess smiled and asked Her Highness to forget what she had said. After all, the most important thing was for Miesa to eat well. Gathering her hair, the woman was amazed at the delicacy of the royal person's neck. Her Highness was playing with her hair and cooing sweetly with the girl. The count caught this scene as he passed by. He didn't like what he saw. At dinner, Clodny was in a bad mood. He was not satisfied with his daughter-in-law's simple behavior at the table. Taliesa tried to explain to her husband that the princess was practicing table manners and asked him not to say anything. Eric showed Her Highness how to tear meat into pieces with his hands. The count was indignant. It was simply ridiculous. How old was the daughter-in-law that she needed to be looked after like that? The wife poured wine into her husband's glass and, smiling sweetly, asked him not to pay attention to the princess. In any case, she did not need it. Then the lady asked her son to make sure that his wife ate the vegetables too. All this cooing over the princess enraged the gentleman completely. He hit the table with his palm and stood up. The Viscount's father informed him that he would soon meet the king. Therefore, he had to make sure that his sister did not fall and hurt herself before that. Afterwards, snatching the cloak from the frightened maid, the lord left. The rest of the Clodny family stayed to finish their dinner. Eric remarked that, come to think of it, there were really only a few days left. The countess asked if the boy had prepared any presents for the palace. His Grace confirmed that he had picked out something suitable. The mother was confident that her son would do well, as usual. The man, continuing to take care of Mies during meals, also hoped so. In the kingdom of Esquilier, it is a tradition for a couple to visit relatives after 50 days of marriage. For Eric and his wife, it is the palace. A few days later, a carriage was being prepared in the courtyard for the trip to the royal castle. All the chests and mattresses needed to be loaded. Malika was giving orders. The Viscount and his wife were already waiting in the carriage when the last bag was loaded. It was strange for him to see how, for the first time in a long time, the palace maid was doing her job. The princess lay on the carriage couch, fingering ribbons. The wife his lordship had accepted under the sympathetic gaze of those around him when he had given up all expectations of marriage was not so bad after all. Eric called her Highness. The girl turned to him. The man asked if she knew his name. Misa became embarrassed and turned away. The Viscount understood that the lady might not understand who he was, but having someone to protect gave young Clodny's life meaning. His Grace continued to talk to his wife. He explained that he was just asking, just in case. Here, the lady-in-waiting entered the carriage, and they set off. The journey was not short. The passengers silently watched the changing landscapes outside the window until they arrived at their destination. The castle was majestic. The couple was led through huge corridors. The echo of their steps was lost in the labyrinth of rooms. Here, everything was bordered by contrasts, and the harsh sunlight penetrating through the huge windows, and the cold gray marble covering every inch of the central palace. This should be frightening, but given the king's actions, it only adds to the anxiety. 20 years ago, a young king ascended the throne and effortlessly stabilized his power thanks to the incredible strength of his mother's family, the Salake. But 12 years ago, when many were at war, something happened in the capital, and the behavior of the sovereign changed dramatically. The floors in the central palace were forever marked by cruelty. The cruel traces were not removed before new ones appeared. Therefore, every step on the stone floor evokes chilling thoughts about whose life ended here. Finally, the newlyweds appeared before His Majesty. Eric greeted Tyrant Murmalik. Miesa stood nearby with a detached look. The king, surrounded by his subjects, sat on his throne and grinned. He said that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. The sovereign noticed that his sister's complexion had improved since the last time he had seen her. After her husband's welcoming speeches, Misu seemed to be overcome and fell to the floor. The king grinned maliciously. He assumed, seeing how his sister's face had improved, that they should expect an addition soon. Eric replied that he hoped so too, although he was very careful to avoid His Majesty's suspicions about the failed wedding night. After all, his lordship does not intend to subject an ignorant person to such pain. They can always take a suitable child from the cadet corps. The Viscount began to say that his wife's health had not yet fully recovered, But the emperor interrupted him mid-sentence. He was not here to chat about the health of this person. A courtier standing nearby whispered something into His Majesty's ear. The tyrant glanced at the lord. The maids told him something interesting. According to them, the evidence of the first wedding night was soaked in blood. But when they came to wash the princess, she was completely unharmed. In fact, from the wedding night until now, the bed and body of Her Highness remained untouched. The king rose from his throne and asked why this was so. Didn't the Viscount want an heir with royal blood? The leader came close to Eric and poked his finger into his chest, forcing him to answer. The monarch then suggested that Chladni had probably deliberately avoided touching his wife because he wanted to end the marriage with the help of the priests. His Grace, of course, denied such a thing. He had not even imagined that the maids would report such details. The emperor glanced slyly from under his eyebrows at the guest and began to slowly walk around him. He said that Eric made fun of the royal family when he held the wedding at the family estate. Although the Viscount got such a nice miesa, maybe this is a rebellion against the royal family. The subject was shocked by the sovereign's speech. He clenched his fist tightly from tension. Did the king really want to go that far? As soon as His Majesty mentioned rebellion, there was no way out. Chladni began to think hard. His life might be in danger, but what about the lives of his parents and the servants of the estate? The Viscount took only 17 knights to the capital, and they would be no match for the royal guard and the city's defense forces. The tyrant sat down a little further away and raised his hand, beckoning the princess. The girl crawled to him on her haunches and sat down next to him. The king began to stroke his sister's hair, trying to find out whether her husband touched her at night. Miesa, making quiet sounds, looked at her brother's boots with interest. The monarch, without waiting for an answer, grabbed Her Highness by the hair and pulled her down, knocking the girl's head over. Milady screamed. His Majesty addressed her harshly, repeating whether her husband had touched her or not. Eric ran up to the royals, shouting, "Your Majesty!" He was confused and did not know what to do. His Grace begged him to let the girl go. The princess tried to say something, but it came out unintelligibly. Then the word painful came out. The courtiers tensed up. The lady repeated back that it hurt there and pointed to the place between her legs. Then Miesa demonstrated the movement and said that he did it like this. The Viscount was completely stunned. The tyrant asked his sister to stop. He was not pleased to hear about his sister's personal affairs. His mood was spoiled, and he rudely pushed Her Highness away. Then he turned to Chladni and said that he could take it. His Grace immediately ran to his wife and embraced her. The carriage, drawn by 4 of the estate's finest bay horses, carried the couple further and further away from this damned palace. Eric held his wife in his arms. The girl, pressed against her husband, dozed. Late in the evening, the Viscount's couple finally arrived home. The butler and maids were waiting for them at the entrance. The majordomo asked if the owners had suffered. The lord replied that he would take care of the princess himself. The man got out of the carriage, still holding Misu in his arms. He gave orders that no one was to enter the second floor of the west wing. Then he ordered to go to the knights and bring Cullen, who was to guard the western part of the castle. The servant immediately rushed to carry out the orders. When the young gentleman was going up the stairs, the princess had a dream. She started to struggle and scream, "Ants!" The knight who was the commander's right hand was already waiting in the corridor. Trying to hold his kicking wife, Eric asked his friend if everything had been explained to him. He also asked him to make sure that no one would come near them today. If anything happened, then immediately inform his Grace. Entering the room, the man put his wife on the bed and leaned over her. He said that now no one would hear them. No matter if she screamed or cried, no one would come. The husband carefully took Misa's hand and asked if she understood that no one would hear anything. The princess looked at her husband with wide-open eyes. His Grace continued that he knew she could talk, so he asked her to say anything. Her Highness began to laugh. The Viscount intertwined his fingers with hers. He was very patient. Chladni was trying to find out how much longer Milady planned to continue pretending, and whether she planned to continue deceiving him if he didn't find out. He wanted to ask something else, but suddenly heard the word dear. His eyes widened in surprise. Then his wife said, "Just ignore Miesa. She doesn't need your attention anyway." Eric looked at the princess. Her face was calm. For a moment, he couldn't even believe his ears when he heard the words from his wife's lips. His Grace asked why she had behaved like that before. Then the wife said in a firm but elegant tone, "They will be like predators looking for prey, so we need to show that everything is okay." And these words sounded somehow familiar. Despite her sweet face and relaxed voice, her hands were shaking slightly from the tension. The Viscount let go of Miesa and sat down next to her on the bed. He apologized and said that he had not meant to pressure her. It was hard to believe that she was so reserved. The man wondered what thoughts had been going through her little head all this time. He heard that his wife had seen her mother die at the age of 8. And after that, she must have seen the king destroy all her half-brothers and sisters. So, to survive, she chose to endure contempt and ridicule, and treatment worse than an animal. Realizing how the princess had lived all these years, the Viscount was simply speechless. His Grace had just met her. He didn't know how to console the girl or tell her that the years of suffering were unfair. Could such a superficial phrase, "It must have been hard for you," somehow console her? All these thoughts drove Eric into a corner. He clenched his fists in despair. His Grace wanted to say something to his wife, but there were no words. It felt like he had swallowed his tongue. The next morning, the couple were disturbed by servants who brought breakfast. Chladni had already woken up and was sitting in a chair by the window. The young lady was still asleep. The lady-in-waiting tried to wake Miesa, but the Viscount suggested that they let her sleep a little longer. He thought that he might be punished for the false report to the king, but it seems that his Grace somehow avoided it. The young master explained that his wife was very tired from the trip. The maid agreed. Then the butler suggested that the man have breakfast first, since he probably had a lot of things to do. Eric had a feeling that the servants had come to check if the newlyweds had confirmed their marriage later. So perhaps it would be better if they misunderstood. The Viscount began his breakfast. The food, eaten alone after a long interval, was like sand. The princess's to-do list for today: make a mess on the table, rip the clothes left by the black-haired man, pull out a strand of gray hair from the maid. And that's only half the tasks. Miesa rubbed her bruised forehead after messing around with the lady-in-waiting. It had been a difficult day with medical examinations, but fortunately, Her Highness had coped. And all because of that brunette. What if he tells her secret to others? After all, yesterday, it seems, this man was very angry. Milady nervously squeezed her dress. He can also tell his wife's secret in the palace and drive her out of this estate. The princess shook her head negatively to her thoughts. She began to calm herself down. Although the man looked very angry yesterday, he still did not seem like a cruel person. But just in case he told about Her Highness, the girl turned and ran to the countess's chambers. Her mother-in-law was busy discussing estate matters with the butler, but she was glad to see her daughter-in-law. Miesa froze in the middle of the room. Taliesa asked how the princess had slept. Then she reproached her a little for the fact that the lady had come alone without servants. It was dangerous. Her Highness rushed to the lady and fell on her knees. The woman began to stroke her relative's hair. It seemed to her that her daughter-in-law was still half asleep. The girl relaxed a little and felt relieved that this lady was ordinary. The countess asked the major domo to continue his report. The servant began talking about repairing the garden fence. Since the owner suggested using other materials, he has studied the matter and wants to suggest using majo wood, which costs 2 jerseys for 1 carril. The garden will eventually need... The princess wondered if importing materials was too expensive for this house. The palace park used zanwood, which was supplied from the southern islands. It was worth 5 times as much, 10 jers for 1 carril. Although she could not judge with knowledge, since she had only been to the royal palace and the palace of Callias. Meanwhile, the major domo continued. The Rogerton family dairy had recently begun producing butter and cheese. It was expensive, but considered good quality, so the servant brought some. The oil costs 20 pasili for 1 case. Madame tasted a piece. The product was really good, so she put some in her daughter-in-law's mouth, offering her to try it too. Misa was calculating in her mind, because 20 pasli is so little. The maid said that a sack of flour costs 20 pasli, so such a small piece of butter costs as much as a sack of flour. The black-haired man was worried about the people's food. If money was tight, they should buy flour. Taliesa leaned towards her daughter-in-law. She was curious whether the girl liked the butter, and whether she ate well, she asked her to buy 5 deal of butter for her son's wife. Then her ladyship asked whether this amount was worth 20 parsley. The butler confirmed this and added that he usually bought butter for 4 parsley. Mayesa continued to calculate. 5 days equaled 100 paisley, which meant 1 jur. She wondered why the black-haired man and the lady were happy to see her simply eating. The lady did not believe that this simple kindness could be for her. In this world, no one would do such a thing for a princess with a curse. Eric came to his mother's chambers for his wife. He wanted to take her, but the girl hugged her mother-in-law's knees tighter and began to make sounds of anxiety. The countess was surprised. Usually, her daughter-in-law left calmly. Her Highness looked at the lady pleadingly. She silently begged for salvation, since she did not want to leave with this man. But the Viscount did not stand on ceremony. He simply grabbed his wife by the waist and lifted her up in his arms. His Grace quietly told the lady that it would be best if she behaved quietly. He added that he had not told anyone about what had happened yesterday. In the evening, Eric and his wife were having dinner in their chambers. They were sitting opposite each other at a small table. The man looked closely at the princess and noticed that she could eat herself. Miesa held her knife and fork and thought. She knew she didn't like this guy at all. Did everything really have to be so formal? The servants in this house are so inefficient. They know that the young mistress prefers to eat with her hands, but they always put knives and forks out for her. Her Highness stared at the cutlery. She hasn't held them in her hands for about 10 years. The lady tried to cut meat and use the fork for its intended purpose. She doesn't have the strength to hold these utensils in her hands. The Viscount appreciated his wife's efforts and said that she was doing well. The girl froze with a fork in her mouth. A strange man! Miesa's mood changed instantly. She threw away her fork and started eating with her hands. Her husband looked at her with surprised eyes. The princess licked her fingers. What was wrong with her husband again? Because if the servants came and saw the order on the table, they would think wrongly and suspect something. Watching the lady lick the food back off her hands, Eric grabbed his head and asked her to stop. Then he took his chair, walked around the table, and sat down next to the girl. Her Highness tried to guess his Grace's mood. She thought he was angry, but it wasn't the first time Misa had eaten carelessly. In any case, she needed to control herself. The man gently took his wife by the chin and asked her to look at him. He was asking what he should do. Maybe he should wipe her face and feed her like before? The princess decided that he was not completely stupid. The Viscount caught his wife's hand and began to wipe it. The lady was a little nervous, as she did not know what to expect from him. The maids cleared the table and led the mistress to the bathroom to bathe. The maid of honor simply poured a basin of cold water on the naked girl. Malika was surprised that her Highness had never fallen ill. Miesa was shivering from the cold. She didn't understand what was going on. Usually, this guy was the one doing the bathing. So why did the maid decide to personally cause trouble for the royal person today? Milady rose abruptly and grabbed the maid by the hair. A fight ensued. Eric went into the bathroom to find out what was going on. The lady-in-waiting was taken aback by the unexpected appearance of the gentleman. She began to babble that the princess had suddenly begun to be capricious. Sometimes, in the heat of such fits, Her Highness could injure herself. The girl was indignant. What a lying old woman. Malika asked His Grace to leave so that she could finish her ablutions. The Viscount moved deeper into the bath. He said that he would finish everything himself. The lady-in-waiting was indignant. How indecent. Why should the gentleman personally wash his wife? He does not need to bother himself, considering that Milady can drown or run away. Chladni objected, so it would be more appropriate for him as a husband to do so. The thin one, realizing that she had lost, began to tell how and with what to wash the princess. She pointed to the tubes and told us what to wash our hair with and what oil to lubricate the ends with. After bathing, we had to dry our body and apply cream. Miesa frowned. What a lie. Usually this old woman roughly washes her body with ordinary soap, and now she says such things. In the palace, they used lye as if they were washing clothes. At least here, things got much better. The husband let the disgruntled maid go. The couple were left alone in the bathroom. Eric turned to the princess. He was able to get rid of the servants, so maybe the girl can cope on her own? Milady was surprised how a person with limited abilities could wash herself. There was no way she could do it herself. The Viscount sighed heavily and blushed a little. He realized that he couldn't get out of it. His Grace asked to wait a little and went to the table with accessories. Misa watched her husband and did not understand why he was angry again. If she continued to get on his nerves, it would not do the lady any good. So she decided to cooperate with him. The princess stood up and came closer to her husband, because one day this man might break off the marriage and reveal her secret to the palace. Her Highness threw off the rest of her clothes. The Viscount blushed and turned away at the sight of his completely naked wife. When Milady first saw his large and terrifying figure, she decided that it was best not to resist his will as much as possible. The king punished his sister with a whip, so she trusted no one. But Mieza seemed to have made a mistake. Although Chladni was imposing and scary, he was kind to her. In the end, it seemed, the girl would not be able to remain unharmed here either. The princess turned her back to her husband and sat on the floor. Her body was shaking. The lady didn't know why he was angry this time, but it didn't matter. It wasn't like she had ever been hurt for any reason before. Eric carefully moved the hair from the back. His gaze was revealed to flesh completely striped with scars. The man began to stutter a little at what he saw. If the wound left such a mark, how serious was it? His Grace tried to find out who did it. He did not understand at all how it was possible to do such a thing. The wife heard pity in her husband's voice. There was a pain in it that was unlike anything she had heard from him before. For some reason, the unfamiliar note of sadness in his voice made her feel trusting. Her Majesty turned her face to Eric. It was difficult for her to answer him, but the girl named the king. His Grace did not know how to react to the information he had heard. He froze for a moment, then rubbed the bridge of his nose in confusion. Now he had to finish the ablution, otherwise the princess might get sick. He would think about the rest later. The man lifted his wife and transferred her to the bath. Chladni rolled up his shirt sleeves and asked the girl to tell him if she felt uncomfortable. He started to sort out the tubes in the bathroom, the first time the husband had done something like that. Mieza thought her husband was angry, but he suddenly looked at her with such pity. She did not understand his change of mood and thought that he should have washed her like a dog. Eric took a bottle of shampoo and began to carefully lather his wife's hair. The princess was confused by the pleasant sensations. The black-haired man was unusually careful. The girl relaxed and gave herself over completely to the process. She hadn't even realized before that washing could be enjoyable. The husband switched from the head to the body, gradually soaping and rubbing the skin with a washcloth. Her Highness felt a little ticklish, which brought a smile to her face. The Viscount rubbed his wife's back with unusual care and moved lower. An awkward moment ensued. They stared at each other. Eric blushed to the roots of his hair. A disabled person doesn't care who washes her private parts, but this man's emotions spread through Mieza like an infection, and she felt awkward too. The husband mumbled an apology, embarrassed. Her Highness did not understand these new sensations. Her husband made her feel strange for no reason. After bathing, His Grace fell into bed fully clothed. The princess could not sleep. She sat next to him on the bed and looked at the dozing man. She realized that he was completely exhausted. The Viscount extended his hand to his wife and said that she should now lie down and sleep. The girl replied that he seemed tired, but Eric caught her hand and pulled her towards him. Milady replied mentally that it was he who should rest, not her. Mieza did not understand this man. Yesterday, he had been irritatingly ungrateful for being spared. Today, he looked at her scars with sympathy. Another time, when Her Highness was eating greedily, the husband could not hide his true feelings and showed hostility. The lady leaned on her elbow and looked at her husband's face. She wondered if he had fallen asleep or not. Even so, this black-haired man seems to be one of those rare good people. The princess quietly got out of bed and left the bedroom. Chladni felt his wife leave. He got up from the bed. A voice could be heard from behind the half-closed door. The man came closer and slightly opened the door. Mieza was standing in the living room in front of the mirror and saying something. It was as if she was rehearsing. The girl was telling Adele to bring medicine for her headache. It should be in her room. Then came the news of a food poisoning outbreak that had been discovered, that the price of the medicine had risen to 7 jerseys and 2 paisleys for 5 derails, and more of the same. The Viscount entered the room. The princess saw his reflection in the mirror. And immediately the phrase, "Darling, Miesa is practicing," was heard, followed by, "Please, don't say anything." She was simply repeating what she had heard earlier. The next morning, the inspection by the ladies-in-waiting was repeated. They had to check if anything had happened the night before. Her lower body was in good condition, so the lady was still intact. Her Highness usually went through all these frequent procedures without emotion. But today, she felt especially dirty, perhaps because of the shame that this black-haired man had awakened in her. When Miesa pretended to be disabled, she didn't care if people pointed fingers at her. But now, when she thinks that her true self will be laughed at, she feels uneasy. The maids continued to discuss how even the naked body of his wife did not excite his grace. Malika noted that no one would want to give their seed to something like that. Be that as it may, they were ordered not to take their eyes off the princess. The lady was thinking at this time that for some time now there were no bruises or wounds on her body. By now, Her Highness should have either fallen or caused a serious incident that would make everyone frown. Already dressed, Miesa walked the corridors of the estate. She was thinking about how she could hurt herself. The girl did not really want to cause herself much pain. Then a beautiful vase on a stand caught her eye. Milady began to consider that perhaps it would make sense to break something very valuable. But mentally, she rejected this idea. It's wrong to break things in a house that uses 2 jerker boards. Suddenly, her gaze slid down the stairs. Right. A slight break would be the easiest way out. She sped up. Diala, yawning sleepily, could not keep up with the princess. Her Highness thought that if she controlled the process well, she would not suffer too much. Yes, it hurt, but there was no other way. Miesa stepped onto the steps. She closed her eyes and decided to pretend that her legs were weak. Suddenly, her husband's voice was heard nearby, saying that he could no longer stand aside and watch. Eric managed to catch his wife with one hand. She was surprised when His Grace declared that he would take care of his wife himself today and dismissed the maid. He had ruined everything. The girl expressed her displeasure with annoyance. The Viscount led his wife into the greenhouse. They settled down comfortably on the garden swing. The princess looked around anxiously. Her husband consoled her by saying that he had removed all the birds from that place. Then he asked if the princess really didn't like birds. She confirmed it. The husband wanted to know the reason. The girl answered that the birds ate it. The man tried to clarify what exactly they ate. Her Highness frowned. Why did he drag her here whenever he wanted? Eric continued to question her. He wanted to know if there was a place where my lady was uncomfortable when she spoke. The wife was surprised by the man's persistence. Claudine calmed his wife down, saying that no one would enter the greenhouse. Therefore, she could speak calmly. But that was not the point. The princess stubbornly remained silent. The Viscount guessed that she was having trouble speaking. From Milady's reaction to these words, he realized that he had hit the nail on the head. Miesa spoke well in her head, but when she tried to say it out loud, His Grace continued to speculate. Perhaps it had been a long time since Her Highness had last spoken to anyone. Therefore, she was unfamiliar with speaking words out of her head. The girl stared at her husband in amazement and nodded. She had never thought about it and didn't know how to explain it, but it seemed like his words might be true. Eric developed the idea further, so when she repeats someone else's words, she does it well. The wife nodded back. The man asked her to try not to nod, but to answer with words. After all, at least a princess can give short answers. Miesa sighed heavily. When she sees a serious expression on her husband's face, even if she doesn't want to, she somehow feels that she must answer. The girl stuttered and answered that she understood, and she herself was frightened. She even instinctively covered her mouth with her hands. Milady thought her voice sounded strange. Her cheeks instantly flushed with embarrassment. Her Highness wondered why this had happened again. The husband tried to encourage his wife by saying that the more she practiced, the easier it would be for her to speak. His Grace gently took the lady's hand and suggested that she watch how he communicated. The princess's eyes widened in surprise. Eric directed her hand to his throat and began to explain that the human larynx was located in this place. Then, pressing his fingers slightly to her neck, he asked if she could feel it. Then he made a long, high A sound and explained that the position of the larynx changes depending on the pitch of the sound. Miesa listened with interest. During silence, the position does not change. A normal voice sounds more pleasant than high sounds. The girl, with her mouth open, felt the changes in her husband's throat. The Viscount explained that he had been taught this when his voice broke. He asked her to try. Her Highness put her fingers to her throat and began to make sounds. His Grace asked if she was beginning to understand. If Milady has something to say, let her try. It could be anything. The wife concentrated and asked haltingly what a voice break was. Eric laughed. Miesa looked at him angrily. She didn't understand why he was laughing. The husband apologized. It's just a bit complicated for the first question. But he immediately began to explain that at a certain age, every person's voice begins to change, and this is called voice breaking. The man assumed that Her Highness was hearing about it for the first time. Then he asked if the lady had any other questions, or if she wanted to say anything. There was something important. The wife looked at Chladni seriously and asked in the words of the maid that she was still untouched, even after he sent everyone away. Eric did not understand what she was talking about. The girl looked questioningly at her husband. Did he really not understand? Then she lifted her legs onto the swing and spread them. This is what Her Highness had in mind. His Grace instantly blushed and quickly brought her knees together. He understood and asked her not to do it again. Misa frowned and asked if they would do it. She was worried that if her husband did not confirm the marriage soon, she could be sent back to the king at any moment. The Viscount replied that he needed a little more time to get to know each other better. Perhaps then he would be able to get rid of the discomfort she had spoken of. The princess didn't understand what this guy was thinking about, since he was so careless. She looked questioningly at her husband and tried to figure out what he meant. Eric suggested a walk through the greenhouse. The lady thought it was not the right time for that, but the maid said the king had ordered observation, so maybe she wouldn't be dragged into the palace today. Her Highness relaxed a little and tried to enjoy the walk. They walked along the garden paths and admired the beautiful flowers. The man had been wondering about one question for a long time and finally asked if it was true that his wife was uncomfortable walking. Miesa smiled slyly. The Viscount chuckled. She had even deceived him. Although, if you think about it, the princess was deceiving everyone from the very beginning. The girl smiled. She managed to perfect such a walk with great difficulty. The husband asked how she did it. It was difficult to explain to Milady. Chladni understood this, and therefore said that there was no need to explain. His wife extended her arms to Eric. He did not immediately understand, and then guessed that the lady wanted him to carry her. His Grace lifted his wife into his arms and noticed that she had walked more than usual today. Misa pressed herself against the man's chest. She thanked God that this black-haired man was much better than she thought. Her Highness thought that this kindness could last forever. The couple were finishing dinner in their chambers. The princess was still worried about the failed wedding night. She remembered the day before the wedding. A priestess was called in to explain the ritual of intimacy. As a formality, the woman simply read the required passage in the scripture in a monotonous voice. Everything seemed strange and bizarre, and there was also mention of a severe pain down there. Her Highness thought of it as a very unpleasant matter, but now it was one of the most important things to strengthen the marriage. Misa clutched the pillow nervously as she sat on the bed. Ideally, she would like to get closer as soon as possible, but after the conversation, her husband constantly makes excuses and puts it off for later. Eric turned his attention to his worried wife. He asked if she wanted to say something. The girl frowned. Even though the Viscount's life was in the king's hands, Milady felt as if it was only her concern. She asked when they would be closer. His Grace asked again. The princess continued to wind herself up. Perhaps the reason the black-haired man was postponing his wedding night was because he wanted to end the marriage. Perhaps all the kindness he showed was a lie, and her husband was just biding his time to get rid of her. The Viscount called his wife by name, but her thoughts were far away. Miesa further suggested that perhaps seeing her naked was not enough to excite her husband. She looked down sadly. Every time people here were kind to her, disturbing thoughts came to mind. Chladni rose from the table and called his wife again. That is why the lady wants to confirm their marriage, to strengthen this union. Because she really likes living here, because then she feels like a child. Her Highness was brought back to reality by her husband gently shaking her and calling her by name. When she looked up at Eric, he asked if she was feeling well. His Grace called her several times. The princess, still hugging the pillow, said, "Who would want to give their seed to something like that?" The husband's eyes widened in surprise, and he asked who dared to say that. The girl lowered her eyes. The Viscount assumed, based on the shrill voice, that it was Madame Malika. The man sat down next to her on the bed. Now he understood what his wife meant. But he was in no hurry to change his mind. They still knew nothing about each other. The lady thought that her husband was up to his old tricks again. Putting the pillow back, she repeated his words about how they could get to know each other first. Then he could ease the discomfort Miesa had mentioned earlier. Her Highness looked angrily at her husband. Eric was a little surprised. Now he understood why his wife had listened to him so attentively then. He asked if she wanted to confirm their marriage, after hearing part of his story. The man got close to the princess's face and said that it was impressive, but he also needed time to prepare. And turning away, he said that it was not something that could be done immediately. The Viscount suggested that they discuss how they would proceed further that night. Milady thought about it. It was strange to her, because she had heard that people were good at intimacy even when they were doing it for the first time. A little later, when his wife had already climbed into bed, Chladni lit a candle and placed it on the bedside table. They were about to have a conversation. The man said that there are many difficult issues now, including the maids who came from the palace. In any case, Miesa wants to confirm the marriage, and he wants to know her. The husband gently touched the girl's hand and suggested that they share something with each other every night. Her Highness perceived this as cooperation. His Grace wanted to start with something simple, like what his wife's favorite food was. She replied that it was meat. The Viscount was surprised. He thought it was cakes or sweets. Then he continued that he liked fruits and vegetables. On the battlefield, they always ate dry rations. The princess looked at him in amazement. The husband asked if the lady was bored sitting at home all the time. His wife didn't understand what he meant. What did bored at home mean? She had always lived like that. Misa closed her eyes and said, "Eric, that's enough." His Grace was surprised to hear a hint of his mother in that phrase. The man laughed loudly. His wife was puzzled by how easily he laughed. Chladni explained that he liked the way she called him by his name and asked her to say it again. It was easy. Miesa said Eric's name. The Viscount listened carefully, then smiled. He gently took the princess's face in his hands and said that she had a pleasant voice. Since her Highness had so willingly submitted, the husband decided to make a small gesture of goodwill. He tenderly kissed his wife on the forehead. The girl was covered by an incomprehensible kaleidoscope of sensations. She touched the kissed place with her fingers. For the first time, she felt a strong interest in someone, the tenacity that had allowed her to deceive people since childhood. She deceived even those who had seen many wounded with her gait. It was surprising and absurd that she had disguised herself so carefully. His Grace looked at his sleeping wife. He was interested in what thoughts were in her little head. The man was genuinely interested in this girl, and he wanted to know more about her. The next morning, Eric was pulled away from his work by screams. When he came in after learning about the situation, he found his wife lying bandaged on the bed. The servants stood around, and the Countess scolded the ladies-in-waiting. She asked why they were fussing and pretending to serve. Both maids were clearly nervous. The Viscount was in shock. The proceedings had already plunged into chaos. In the morning, the ladies-in-waiting came to the master's room, as usual, for another medical examination of the princess. Since the sheets were only rumpled on one side, it looked like they had not touched each other. Malika looked at the girl, but something eluded her attention. She even tried to talk about it with the second maid, but she couldn't figure out what had changed recently. Diala asked if her partner was meeting that family today. Her friend replied that the meeting was tomorrow. The lady-in-waiting was curious what they would bring this time. The maids began to lift the young mistress to get dressed. Misa wondered what family the workers were talking about and what they were supposed to bring. For more than a decade, the steadily increasing compulsive behavior has been giving alarm signals. The maids continued to talk. Malika wondered why the 3 pillars of the kingdom were in such a state. The other didn't know the answer. She was more interested in how much longer they had to be here. Diala thought it wouldn't take long. At this time, the princess thought that if she did nothing today, it would increase suspicions. While the maids were putting the dress on the lady, she continued to pretend to be a person with disabilities and giggled stupidly. A little later, 2 of the estate's maids were carrying baskets of linen through the corridors. They were discussing the gift they had prepared for the young lady, and they really hoped that she would like it. Suddenly, they heard strange sounds. The women tried to figure out what they were hearing. Perhaps it was a scream. Suddenly, screaming loudly, Her Highness was rushing towards them at high speed. She ran past them so fast that the maids' headscarves were blown up by the wind, and they didn't even realize what it was. Only a few seconds later did they realize it was Miesa. The women began to shout for the lady to stop, but the princess realized with lightning speed that this time she could not hesitate, especially with two maids as witnesses. She quickly looked around and decided to head for the stairs. But there were many servants on the steps, and the girl realized that it wouldn't work there. So, she needed to urgently find another suitable place. The open door gave her a new idea, and Milady headed there. Opposite the door was a balcony, and there was no one in the room. The girl quickly climbed onto the railing. There were flowers growing luxuriantly under the balcony, so Her Highness, without thinking twice, jumped down. She hoped that they would be able to soften her fall. All the household members gathered around the bed of the injured young mistress. Taliesa was scolding the ladies-in-waiting. She wondered if it was really that hard to keep an eye on someone in such a short period of time. Her ladyship reproached the maids for being idle all day long, but nevertheless, they insisted on personally bathing and dressing the young lady. Eric entered the room. He leaned over his lying wife. The scratches on her face were covered with a bandage. The girl seemed to be unconscious. The Viscount turned to Gela, a member of the Clodny family knights. He ordered an investigation, and he also thought it would be wise to assign one of the estate's maids to watch over his wife from now on. So he asked Adele to accompany Madame Malika to the palace, there to report what had happened to His Majesty and return. He dismissed all the other servants. The Countess sat in a chair near the bed. She turned to her son, who would have thought that following the plans of foolish people would be so difficult. These women need to suffer so that they understand. She asked His Grace what he thought about it. The man was nervous because he thought that his mother saw his wife as her youngest daughter. The Viscount remembered the day his sister died. It was the spring before her 10th birthday. It was the day Rosie was alone in the forest without a nanny. The girl was walking and picking flowers. A drunken knight was racing on a horse and could not control the animal. By a tragic coincidence, the child got in his way. On the day that the little sister left this world, the mother lost her mind. She punished everyone: the knight who was responsible for the incident, the groom who gave away the horse, and even their families, including the elderly and children. The father criticized his wife's actions. Since then, the parents began to distance themselves from each other, and today, the Countess seems to have lost her mind again, as she did that day. Therefore, it is better for her not to interfere right now. Eric turned to his mother and said that this was his wife's business, and he would deal with it himself. Given her ladyship's anger, it could turn against someone else. Gela approached with a report. Upon examination, it was discovered that there was a small bruise on Madame's right wrist. The necessary measures were taken. Therefore, there should be no serious problems with Her Highness's mobility. Milady Clodny breathed a sigh of relief. She rose from her chair and told her son that he was right, and that she had better go back to her room and cool her head. She finally leaned over to her daughter-in-law and asked His Grace to sort everything out properly. As she left, the Countess added that she would leave the rest to the young gentleman. He asked to return later. The knight also wanted to take her leave, but Eric slowed her down a little. He asked again if she was sure there were no other serious wounds. The girl added that the lady had several deep scars on her body, but unfortunately, they were too old to be treated. That's why she didn't mention them. The Viscount became wary. The medic immediately waved her hands, insisting that she was not going to tell anyone about this. She never divulged important information. His Grace asked whether the girl had ever made indiscreet remarks while drunk. He added that it seemed to him that she had had little to do lately. Gela tried to justify herself, but the master interrupted and said that from tomorrow she would report here. He would warn the head maid. The warrior was very surprised. It was quite unexpected. The medic took the suitcase with instruments and tried to say something, but the commander had already let his subordinate go. When the door slammed shut, Eric turned to his wife. He knew she was awake. The man asked the princess why she did this. There must be a reason. Miesa was shaking in bed. The Viscount leaned over her and tried to find out why she had done this. The girl remained stubbornly silent. His Grace exhaled loudly and sat down next to her on the bed. He tried to calm his wife down, saying that everything was fine and that she could tell him why she had caused all this fuss. Her Highness opened her eyes and turned away. She said that there was a reason. The husband insisted that she tell. The girl stuttered two words, difficult and say. Eric grabbed his head. He asked the princess never to hurt herself again. The husband suggested that they just break something instead. And then he added that he wasn't saying that she couldn't do anything, she could do whatever she wanted, but she shouldn't hurt herself. The wife's eyes widened. The Viscount asked her if she understood what he was talking about, and asked her to promise that she would not harm herself again. Her Highness pulled the blanket up to her face and muttered that she swore it here and now. Eric breathed a sigh of relief. He looked tenderly at his wife and suggested that she rest, and if she was hungry, she should just say so. The lady looked intently at His Grace. The husband assumed she wanted to say something. Misa asked, emphasizing the words, if the girl was her servant. The man smiled. He was surprised that of all the things she was interested in this. Chladni said he was thinking of doing so, and added that she did not like it. The princess shook her head. It was a relief. After all, they said she was a student of a famous doctor and was quite good at treating external injuries. Despite her appearance, Gela is quite strong and can handle a couple of wolves, and she is quite careful. The wife asked how careful. The husband chuckled and replied that the knight was not one to be easily bribed. She was a doctor, so she had not been caught and tortured. But it would still be better for the princess to pretend for now. Then Eric asked if the husband remembered Cullen, who was standing at the door the day they returned from the palace. Now, the Viscount plans to assign him to guard the west wing on the second floor. After losing 2 fingers during interrogations, the warrior now uses his left hand to wield his sword. The man is one of the most reliable men his lordship knows. Miesa nervously fiddled with her fingers, but her husband reassured her, saying that he hadn't told his friend anything about her. In any case, since the princess was injured, the Viscount needed to take a break from work for a while. Her Highness blossomed with joy at what she heard. Chladni decided that perhaps it was because he was the only one who knew her secret. He gently straightened her hair and said that he would leave early in the morning to take care of urgent matters, but would return immediately. The lady's reaction was not long in coming. Eric thought about how his wife often loses control in front of him and shows different facial expressions. One moment she is worried and then quickly relaxes, or how she now looks suddenly excited. Her Highness rose from her pillow and asked joyfully what it meant. A lot of time and a lot of stories. Chladni did not understand, but he saw her expectant look. The girl touched her husband's hand. Trying to express her thoughts, the princess said a few words. Get closer and prepare mentally, and then she asked if it would be now or tomorrow. His wife's unpredictable actions always surprise His Grace. The man got angry and almost shouted at the girl. He asked how she could talk about such things when she was injured. That milady should not even think about intimacy until she was fully recovered. Misa did not expect such a reaction. She even got a little scared and frowned. The Viscount realized that he couldn't take his eyes off her, even when he was angry with his wife. He knew that they were very different. The princess sat upset, a slight blush covering her cheeks. Eric calmed down a little. He asked milady why she was in such a hurry. The girl hesitated, nervously fiddling with her fingers. Then she explained with the king's phrase that he had not touched the princess and wanted to get a divorce from the priests. Then she said the cousin's phrase, which said that she needed to get rid of her as soon as possible. Then came another phrase from his brother, where he mentioned that the Viscount had almost married Laquine Crispin. The husband sighed heavily and clutched his head. All this time, his wife had been worried about Amberic's words. Eric took his wife by the shoulders, forcing her to look him straight in the eye. He calmly told her that he had absolutely no intention of getting a divorce. They had a long life together ahead of them, so there is no reason to rush things now since they hardly know each other. Misa looked away thoughtfully. The husband noticed this and asked if she had any strange thoughts again, and at the same time asked her to just ask him directly everything that interests or worries her. Chladni will answer any question because he does not hide anything. Come to think of it, the princess sat on his lap and read documents at every opportunity. Her husband showed her confidential information, so he has nothing to hide anymore. Milady lowered her eyes a little guiltily. The Viscount carefully laid his wife on the pillows and asked her to rest, and offered to call the maid if she could not sleep. The girl asked why. Eric was surprised because his wife always spent time in the workshop. It seemed she liked it. The princess answered that it was not fun. His Grace asked again. Miesa explained that the kitchen and laundry were noisy and lively, but the workshop was where people worked with their hands, and it was quiet. The maids were always talking, and the lady heard everything. The man then realized that his wife was going to the maid's workshop to get information. So he asked her if she did the same in the palace. His wife happily confirmed that she did. She immediately repeated some of the gossip. How someone had asked if Palstgrave was still alive, and about the bribe that head maid Namira had received from Madame Malika. Her Highness smiled broadly. She knows everything. Eric was impressed. The princess burst out. Then she told that Adele likes the white-haired butler. 2 maids were talking about this. They also added that the head maid liked big, portly men. She liked strong guys. The Viscount asked again about strong ones. Then it dawned on him, and he asked if the butler liked Adele. The wife responded with the words of the maids, that the head maid would not still be single if she wanted to marry the stubborn butler. Chladni was shocked. It turned out that all her actions so far had made sense. The husband lay down next to the princess. The girl became wary. The husband wanted to talk more closely. He told her that intimacy would happen in a few days. The wife beamed with joy. Then the husband asked why Madame Malikia had bribed the head maid named Namira. He assumed that either she was making trouble or wanted to accompany Her Highness. Misa remained silent, and then turned away altogether. Chladni decided to cheat. He said that his wife had to answer if they wanted to get closer. His wife said the word liar. The Viscount did not understand. Then the girl answered that tomorrow was the meeting of the Malika and the deceiver. And she added, the 3 pillars of the kingdom. The 3 pillars of the kingdom are the Chladni, Salichez, and Crispin families. The Salichez clan was wiped out a few years ago. Then Miesa remembered Lacane catching up with them in the garden, and that someone was hiding behind the trees. Most likely, the pillar the lady-in-waiting is meeting with is Crispin. Her Highness needs to involve people from both sides to find out what is going on. She knew her thoughts were unclear right now, but if this man was planning to do something dangerous, then what should she do? Eric suddenly kissed his wife on the cheek. The girl instantly blushed. Her husband said that it was in gratitude for her answers. In the morning, the Viscount was dressing in the dressing room when he heard loud voices from the bedroom. The maids were having a showdown near the princess's bed. Gela, holding a jar of ointment in her hands, was indignant at the absurdity of the maid of honor's statement. She asked Malika in a raised voice if she was in her right mind, since she claimed that the cream could harm the mistress. The thin one objected that, how did she know? Perhaps there was poison in this mixture. How dare she suggest this to the princess? The medic was furious. The girl dipped her fingers into the ointment and put them in her mouth. Yes, how dare she act like she's in charge here? Gela grimaced a little and swallowed the mixture. Then she shouted to the lady-in-waiting, "Look, it's safe!" Eric, who entered the bedroom at that moment, suggested that Malika try the cream on herself, since she was so worried about Her Highness. The maid's jaw dropped at such a proposal. The husband approached his wife, who was chewing on the bedspread. He gently tucked her hair behind her ear and said he would be back before lunch. He suggested that she rest until he arrived. Already at the door, the lord ordered the maids to take good care of Her Highness. Coming out of the chambers, he, frankly speaking, still did not understand Miesa's actions yesterday. Why did she need to harm herself? His Grace walked down the corridor and thought about how this incident had given him an opportunity to put pressure on the palace maids. Perhaps his wife had planned it all along. In any case, to understand her true motives, he first needs to get rid of prying eyes. And then, step by step, Amberic was indignant in the Viscount's office. He was not impressed by the news that he would have to train knights. The commander asked him to do this for a while. The cousin was angry that Eric had made such a decision himself. The brother hit himself in the chest with his fist. He had a lot of his own things to do. His Grace was surprised that his relative had a job besides chasing after every skirt. Amberic wanted to say something else, but the elder said that was enough. Then he added that he would start tomorrow. The cousin flew out of the office in anger. Chladni decided to temporarily hand over the training of knights to his brother until Miesa had fully recovered. Next to enter the audience was Cullen. The knight reported that, as the commander had ordered, he had assigned warriors to Madame Malika and Crispin. The paladin had assigned knights skilled in stealth to spy on them. The commander praised him for the work he had done and asked him to bring Adele, but not to tell the countess about it. After a while, there was a knock at the door. The viscount invited them in. It was the maid. She was asking what was the matter, as the servant had suddenly called her. Adele is an experienced headmaid, whom her ladyship has looked after since she was a child. Thanks to her, it was easy to get rid of these two ladies-in-waiting. After yesterday's visit to the palace with Madame Malika, the maid had thoughtfully brought a transcript of Palstgrave's report. Fortunately, she had managed to convey the facts accurately. However, if the royal maids are replaced by someone similar, then everything will be in vain. Therefore, the master needs the girl's help. She was surprised. Adele is more suitable for the choice of palace maids than the viscount, who spent 12 years on the battlefield. The maid remained in the capital, interacting with the other two families, gathering information, and dealing with many other issues. The girl objected and said that it would be better if the young mistress made a decision. His Grace remarked that he had already received permission from the countess to take the maid for a short time, but the master would prefer that the information obtained during the investigation should not reach the ears of his mother. Adele nodded that she understood. First, Eric wanted to find out about the bribe that Malika had given to the palace's head maid. He wondered which of the intermediaries the maid could connect him with. The girl thought about it, weighing up various options. It would be difficult to contact Namira directly, but she had heard that her right hand, Viscountess Manners, was worried about her brother-in-law's affairs. If they could solve them, then her ladyship might be ready for anything. At lunchtime, as Eric had promised, he returned to his wife's chambers. What he saw in the room surprised him. The princess and Hela were sitting on the floor, a pallet lay nearby, and tubes of paint were scattered around. Miesa was scribbling on paper with a brush. The medic smiled. She said that music or theater were good for people with mental illnesses, but drawing would be better because it could be done in the bedroom. Chladni asked who had figured this out. He had never heard of such a thing. It was clearly not in the textbooks. The maid continued. She had heard that the young mistress had been through a lot, so she thought that it would be good for someone who constantly held back her emotions to pour them out on paper. His Grace sat down next to his wife and began to wipe the paint off her face. He asked her to simply read books to the lady from that moment on. Gela thought about it and decided that it made sense. If she were to read a book, then a fairy tale. Her thoughts were interrupted by the owner, who said that was all for today. The girl was surprised. The man explained that the maid herself said that she had a lot of work, so she could go and do her business and return tomorrow morning. The medic started to ask if she should continue working as a doctor. The viscount wasn't really listening to her anymore, so he asked again. But the girl was already happily closing the door, saying that they would see each other tomorrow. Cullen was on duty outside the door. Gela closed the door and stopped. She clenched her fists in irritation. The medic cursed. How could the master squeeze all the juices out of her? The servant was indignant that his lordship wanted her to work as both a maid and a doctor at the same time. She knew that after the war, there was little work for doctors. If she had known in advance, she would have stayed in the village and treated patients. The warrior commented that she would be paid for both positions. Gela didn't expect anyone to hear her. She was embarrassed and said that then she had nothing to complain about. Then the door swung open, and Eric almost hit the maid. He went out to ask where the princess's clothes were so she could change. The girl realized that she needed to bathe her mistress, but the master said that he only needed clothes. As soon as the medic said that the things were under the shelf, the door immediately closed. The girl exhaled and said that it was good when the viscount got used to getting straight to the point. The knight remarked that this was not surprising, since all commanders were like that. The maid hesitated how to say this. Despite his behavior, his Grace was always polite to the young mistress. Cullen wondered what was wrong with the respect for the princess. The girl replied that the commander could barely communicate with his wife, but the way he looked at her. Then she came to her senses and told the guy not to pay attention. After all, it's great when gentlemen get along well. She was probably overstepping her bounds. The knight replied that he had never personally seen how the master communicated with his wife, but he always followed etiquette. His tone may be cold, but the Viscount was never rude. Gela smiled mysteriously. Well, so far his grace is not hiding anything from us. The warrior agreed. The commander is one of those who values trust above all else. Miesa sat in a warm bath. Her hands were wounded, so her husband helped her wash off the paint after painting. Eric noticed that she wasn't answering very well yet. From now on, she should try answering in simple words. Rubbing her fingers gently, he added that it would get better with practice. When her husband had finished the main work, the princess told him to leave. Chladni asked if she was sure she could handle it herself. His wife replied that everything was fine and he could leave. My lord smiled and asked to call him if anything was needed. He left the bathroom and closed the door behind him. Eric paused for a moment at the door and heard a loud splash. He turned towards the sound and smiled. A few minutes later, Miesa came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel and with drops of water on her body. Her husband asked if she had washed herself well. The girl was upset and answered negatively. Then she added that Gela would wash her tomorrow. The Viscount, who was holding the towel, agreed with her. The man noticed that she had put her nightgown on backwards. Drops of water were still running down her skin, so Eric said she needed to dry it off well. The girl was wary of this. Afterwards, having put her to bed, her husband bandaged her hands again. He asked how her morning had gone. The princess replied that Gela had done well. My lord noted to himself that her fingertips were wrinkled from the bath. He wondered if she was comfortable staying there. Miesa replied that it was good and she liked it. Eric added that he had warned the kitchen that she liked meat. Then he asked her why she used to be so thin. The princess still had trouble expressing her thoughts. So, as usual, she answered with someone else's phrase. Why bother feeding her? She'll smear more on her body than she'll eat. Just give her some greens. Chladni asked if Mrs. Malika and Mrs. Diala were really her maids. The girl replied that there used to be 5, now there were 2. Eric thought about it. He said that the women were quite disrespectful. Misesa was alarmed. She grabbed her husband's hand and shouted that if they were hurt, Vermal would know. The Viscount repeated the name, and then remembered that it was the name of the king before his coronation. Still holding his hand, his wife looked at him with her huge eyes. The husband was a little confused and said that over the past few days she had begun to speak more freely. The princess was delighted and replied that she had always been good, she just hadn't practiced. Chladni asked why. The girl replied that she wanted to practice at night, but when she woke up, Eric would act like this. And she showed how her husband rolled over in his sleep and pinned her to the bed with his hand. That's why she couldn't. The man was a little embarrassed and replied that he did not know. He was afraid that she would leave the room. From now on, she could practice freely. Miesa pointed her finger at her forehead and said that she was talking, so now here. The husband smiled and then kissed her on the spot she showed. He noticed that she was an informant, always concerned that her words were valuable. The princess repeated the word thoughtfully and scratched her forehead. From that time on, Miesa began to practice speaking more. The number of questions increased. She often asked basic things that she, surprisingly, did not know. For example, what is a scammer? What does damn it mean? And so on. Sometimes she asked questions that were difficult to answer, which drove her husband into a dead end. One day, when they were walking in the garden and sat on a bench, Miesa asked how an ordinary girl of her age lived. Then, what others thought of the king. Another time during lunch, she wondered why some people die from a small cut on the wrist, while others survive having their hand cut off. Every day that the princess spoke, her speech became more and more natural. Lying in bed after a long day, Miesa once said that she already knew these words. She always said them in her head. Then she added that since she had already answered, he should kiss her faster. The husband remarked that he wished she would correct her casual manner of speech. The girl asked why. Eric said that they were husband and wife. Therefore, they should speak politely to each other. The princess did not understand. The lady remarked that she was of royal blood, and he was merely the son of an earl. The Viscount laughed loudly and replied that he should be polite then. The wife asked seriously, "What to do then?" My lord replied that since they were now married, she too was an ordinary aristocrat. They had a morganatic marriage. This is when people of unequal status marry, in which the spouse of lower status does not receive a higher status as a result of the marriage. The girl just sighed in disappointment. Eric was fascinated by her concentrated gaze as she listened to him attentively, and also her little mouth, which carefully pronounced each word. The man wondered why he hadn't realized right away that his wife was so charming and beautiful. Kissing her fingers, he asked her if she was disappointed. Misa answered negatively. She liked it here, so even if she became an ordinary aristocrat, it would be fine. Putting her palm to his cheek, Eric replied that he was glad. The princess brushed away a lock of his hair and said that she was also glad that she had saved him because he was kind. The Viscount asked her what she meant. The lady replied that she had saved him from being accused of treason. The man thought that if he had not faced danger, he would not have married her. He wouldn't have seen her face, her flushed cheeks, those chattering lips, her expression changing every minute, which made his heart beat faster. He said that he would live with gratitude. The princess laughed and asked if it was true that she would be married. Looking at every feature of her beautiful face, Eric gently intertwined his fingers with hers. Coming very close to her, looking into her blue eyes, her husband quietly asked her to close her eyes. The Viscount ran his thumb over her lips. He noticed that the princess's lips were tense, so, practically touching her, he suggested that she relax. Then he kissed her. Their fingers intertwined even more, and the kiss continued. For Miesa, this action seemed strange. She didn't understand the point of such close contact, especially when his tongue penetrated her mouth, and it seemed to her that there was nothing there to get out and eat. Feeling her tension, her husband broke the kiss and looked into her eyes. Her frightened look made Eric laugh. He kissed her tenderly on the forehead, then on the cheek. Her Highness murmured that it was strange. Chladni kissed her lips again, then began kissing her neck and moving lower. The girl grabbed his face and pushed him away from her. She started to say that it was wrong. Then she asked him if he even knew how to do it and if he had done it before. She shouted that he was doing it all wrong. The upper body should not be touched at all. She studied with a priest, so she knows well. Eric kissed her hand and explained that what he was doing now was to make this process less painful for his wife. But Miesa said he had learned it wrong. The Viscount replied that they would achieve nothing if she persisted. He asked her not to be stubborn, as he knew only one way to do it. But the princess still turned away. Chladni said he did not want to hurt his wife, pushing him away from her. The lady noticed that he was doing senseless things, to which the husband retorted that sometimes he thinks about her the same way. Therefore, it is good that they come to an understanding. Her Highness told him to just hurry up But Eric interrupted her and said it would be better if she kept quiet. It would help a lot. The next morning, both royal maids were bending over the princess's bed, looking at their sleepy charge. One of them noticed that it looked ambiguous, but it was still unclear whether they did it or not. It all happened so suddenly. The appearance of the mistress must have changed the mood. Miesa didn't understand what the word mistress meant. Eric had been intimate with her all night, but it seemed pointless to her. Now she doubted that her husband understood the essence of marital relations. Gela entered the bedroom. Malika noted that the mistress had arrived. If things continued like this, they would have problems. The girl brought spare clothes, because she was worried that the lady's dress from yesterday was not dry yet. But she couldn't finish speaking, because she noticed strange spots on the princess's neck and chest. Her eyes widened and the medic asked when and where this rash appeared. The Vicomte was talking to Adele in his office. The maid said that it looked like they would have a hard time finding a replacement for Madame Malik. The man asked why. He thought there was something more behind it. The girl replied that she had stopped investigating further to avoid suspicion. Eric thought about it. It was strange because it seemed like she didn't have any special abilities. Judging by what Adele found out, Malika has some really bad habits. She even tried to steal valuables from the palace and was only able to maintain her position by bribing the head maid. But despite this, they did not fire her. The countess's maid put a folder with documents on the table. She reported that, judging by the case of the royal maid, Viscountess Manor continues to skillfully provoke the head maid by giving her gifts. The head maid's love of luxury predictably made this task easier. This folder contains a list of the jewelry that the head maid received from Viscountess Manor. Chladni accepted the documents and praised him for his good work. The girl timidly asked him to stop. Eric only looked at her heavily from under his eyelashes. In the garden, not far from the stream, under the crown of a tree, Miesa was picking at something in the ground with a stick. A leaf fell on her face, and the girl twisted her head from side to side, trying to throw it off. Gela still couldn't come to her senses. She couldn't understand how the commander could treat a man who acted like a child in such a way. She assumed that he might have lost his mind. The girl turned to the princess and advised, if she doesn't like her husband, she can express it more decisively. For example, by resisting, then, perhaps, everything will work out. But seeing the detached look of her highness, Gela dejectedly noted who she was even talking to. Especially since they were a couple after all. So who would be against it? The princess continued to rummage in the ground. The medic looked at her sympathetically and felt sorry for the poor lady. Sitting next to Miesa, the girl said that she always considered her younger brother to be the most passionate and emotional person, but now she is not so sure. Resting her head on her crossed arms, Gela continued to say that in her family there was a girl who was like a princess. Her name was Tuli. In fact, the doctor had 7 brothers and sisters, 8 children in total. As a rule, people like them always have many children. One day, a plague swept through their village, and Tuli barely survived. Although she survived, the fever did not go away without consequences. The girl became like a young lady. At that time, her father was a blacksmith's assistant. Therefore, it was difficult for him to raise a sick child. He could not even provide for himself. One day, their father took Tuli away and returned alone. Much later, Gela learned that he had taken her to a place from which she could not return. The girl is still very sad, but she can't tell anyone about it, because people just scold and say that she's not the only one who had something like this. Miesa learned something new from this story. It is normal for family members to kill each other. Gela added that she usually tells all her worries to the horses in the stable or to the yard dogs. She thanked the lady for listening to her. The princess smiled. She was often called a rat or a monkey, so being compared to a horse or a dog didn't seem so bad to her. The medic looked at the princess with pity. She said that when she first saw her, she was sure, but the Viscount, who was approaching them, did not let them finish. He was glad that he had found his wife. Hela immediately jumped up as soon as she heard his voice. Her Highness was a little upset that she could not find out what the maid wanted to tell her. Eric thanked the girl for her good work and said that she could go. The medic hesitated a little, so the man asked if she wanted to say anything. The girl shook her head and said that they would see each other tomorrow. When the maid left, Chladni asked if his wife was having fun. He approached her and gently straightened her bangs. Turning to him, Miesa said that he no longer needed to come and pick her up. The man, surprised, asked what she meant by that. Tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear, Eric asked if that meant his wife didn't like him coming after her. She replied that it wasn't that. She, as usual, repeated a phrase that someone had already said. "Sorry to bother you when you are so busy." The Viscount did not quite understand what it meant. Miesa continued that when she is with him, people are mostly silent, but when she walks with Gela, they talk a lot. "It's fun." Chladni said that he understood. And in a somewhat dull voice, he added that since she liked walking with Gela so much, the princess noticed this and thought that he was dissatisfied with something. But her husband touched her shoulder and suggested that she put on suitable clothes. Her Highness looked at him in surprise. Eric replied that, of course, she was often changed, but these clothes were not very suitable. He took her arm gently and asked if there was any particular reason why the servants dressed her in such low-quality dresses. He would like the princess's clothes to be made of decent fabric. Miesa thought about the reason. In fact, there really is one. The original plan was that by seeing her being treated with disdain, the Chladni family would no longer see the girl as a threat. At the same time, she showed her true colors. They deliberately addressed the princess by her title, thereby trying to arouse hostility in everyone. But Miesa still has to play crazy, and she wouldn't want to tell her husband about it. Because of this, Her Highness replied that tomorrow she would be digging a hole under the tree again, so she did not want to ruin the good clothes. In any case, she should be careful with her words and actions, just in case so as not to provoke her brother once again. Eric took her hand gently and replied that he understood. Then the husband would simply pick up a softer fabric. Looking at her dirty fingers, the Viscount suggested that in future she take something with her and not dig with her bare hands. After wiping a little under her eye with his finger, her husband noticed that she looked a little sunburned, but he was glad that she looked healthy. The girl realized with gratitude that her husband always treats everything she does with understanding, and also notices any changes in her. The man added that he was very worried when they first met because she looked very pale and fragile, but now she is quite energetic. The princess looked around. On days like these, she liked to sit outside and enjoy the scent of the grass. She hoped that her brother would not ruin this peaceful life. The gardener was approaching them, so Misa began to diligently dig in the ground with a stick again. The worker greeted the gentleman. The Viscount asked if the man had come to check the nests. The gardener nodded. He was watching the trees to make sure no one disturbed the birds during nesting. The dendrologist asked not to worry, as he would immediately report if birds settled here. His Grace praised the worker for his work. The princess looked askance at the gardener. Maybe it was all because of her husband, who had given her a new life. Although his words sometimes seemed strange to her, Eric reported that the gardener had left. His wife whispered to him how well he knew the man. Because every time she digs here, he makes a face. It seems to her that the worker does not like her digging in the ground. Chladni smiled and replied that no gardener would like someone digging a hole in the garden. However, if he tells her anything, then that's a different story. Then, of course, he will punish him. Mies thought with gratitude that, despite the fact that her words sometimes sounded stupid, Eric always responded to her humorous remarks. He also tries to choose his words so as not to offend his wife. That's why she thinks that her husband is like a prince from a fairy tale, merciful, fair, and wise. It was getting close to lunchtime, so the sun began to warm the ground more actively. The Viscount stood up and invited his wife to go into the house, as it was getting hotter. Late in the evening, Eric continued what he had started the night before. Sitting on the bed, he hugged and kissed his wife. Between caresses, he asked her what else she liked about what he did to her. The princess was mentally indignant that her husband was doing these strange, useless things again today. If only he had listened to her and done everything right. But he keeps asking these unnecessary questions. She had already begun to doubt that he cared about his own life. But still, Miesa answered him that she liked it when he held her close and carried her in his arms. Chladni asked why. The girl did not understand why he continued to torment her. The man pulled her away from him and said that he would wait so that she could answer slowly. Her Highness knew that if she didn't answer now, he wouldn't touch her again. And then they wouldn't be able to avoid the consequences. That's why she told him that if she walks for a long time, straining her legs, they will cramp. That's why she likes it when he carries her in his arms. The girl didn't understand why he wouldn't just have sex with her. She remembered how Malika had once said that perhaps he wasn't attracted to her naked body. So it was strange that he didn't think his life was at stake. Or maybe the appearance of his mistress influenced him. So Miesa asked if they were lovers. Eric asked again. The girl explained that this was a man and a woman who had a special relationship. She asked again if they had such a special relationship. The Viscount replied that they were spouses, not just lovers. Grabbing him by the shirt, the princess with innocent eyes asked if another person could become his lover, even though they were married. Chladni exhaled loudly and asked if the maids had told her anything strange again. But then he replied that sometimes married people have affairs on the side, but he is not one of those people. He will not have another woman, and the man hopes that she will have no one else but him. Eric gently touched her face. He explained that he simply could not accept such a thing. And it was not only about breaking oaths, it was tantamount to betrayal. The Viscount held his wife tightly to his chest. Then he pulled back a little and ran his thumb over her lips. He said he was interested in something else. She had developed a Kazan accent, so he asked if she had learned it from Gela. The girl thought about it and answered that it was possible. Then she asked if it sounded strange. The husband smiled and answered that it was nice, after which he kissed her. Miesa thought that intimate relations lasted only a few minutes. The abbess did not talk about anything like that. Yet these useless actions continued to arouse inexplicable emotions in her that left her confused. The next morning, the maids surrounded the princess. They asked her to sit still for 1 minute. The girls dressed her highness in a bib that they made themselves and had flowers on it. Miesa immediately began to gnaw on it. Gela said that she looked like a fairy. The workers immediately started chattering about how it suited her very well, that she shouldn't eat it, etc. Adele watched all this from afar. That same evening, the maid came to the Viscount. During the conversation, the girl said that she did not think that it was necessary to show blind and unconditional loyalty to the family. She thought that his lordship had chosen the wrong path. Chladni did not quite understand what she meant, so he said not to beat around the bush, but to speak frankly. Adele was a little embarrassed and, nervously fiddling with the hem of her dress, she blurted out that it was time for the gentleman to get a mistress and stop paying so much attention to the princess. The man froze for a few seconds after hearing this. Then he asked her if she thought that loyalty meant entering into a close relationship with another woman. The maid frankly said that she did not understand why he handed over the leadership of the knights to the young Master Embrick, while he himself only spent time with his wife. She looked down and wondered how she could share responsibilities with a man who couldn't even speak. After all, by doing so, he provides an opportunity for members of the collateral branch, who are aiming for the place of heir. He is only concerned about how to replace the maids from the imperial palace, and what the two women who laze around all day are talking about. At this time, no one is raising the princess. Yesterday, she dug up the seedlings in the garden again. He is clearly spoiling her. The old count starts a relationship with a woman from the bar, and he is only focused on replacing these useless maids. This situation worries her a lot. The Viscount objected that she herself said that something was wrong with the maid Malika. He then turned to the knight and asked him if he had really neglected his business while spending time with his wife. Apart from training the knights, the warrior replied that this was not so. He had recently solved the food problem by handing over the ore he had received as a reward to Marquis Heta. In gratitude, he provided food supplies for several years ahead. There is practically no ore on the Marquis' territory. Their lands are flat, which makes for good agriculture. They have 2 more mines, in addition to the Kalak iron mine. As for Mr. Embrick, ever since he took over the training of the knights, his authority has fallen significantly, to the point that the knights now believe that Eric is more suitable to be the head of the family. After this, the Viscount turned to Adele and asked her to speak frankly if something was bothering her. The woman silently lowered her head. So his lordship said that he now wants us to concentrate on the matter. The maid replied that she realized she had been mistaken. The gentleman had indeed been looking after everything. She had crossed the line. Adele thought about it. The young gentleman had always been a rational man who knew how to set priorities. At this crucial moment, when the struggle for power is inevitable, he spends all his time with his wife, leaving the training of knights. It's all because of this stupid woman who has clouded his mind, and not only his. The maids and even the mistress are bewitched by her. She considers her a charming child. At first, the maid thought that the countess simply sympathized with this woman. But when it comes to the princess, the lady loses her mind, as if she sees her daughter Rosie in her. She doesn't know what to do. Everyone is clearly bewitched by her. Eric had breakfast with his wife and did as much as possible to eliminate the consequences of her activity. While scooping up another portion of food with her hand, Miesa said that she wanted to go outside. She learned from the book that Hella was reading that there were many people walking in the streets. The Viscount asked her if she wanted to visit the city. The girl replied that she had heard that merchants lined up their stalls and sold their goods in the open air. She wondered if all the streets in the city were like that. Chladni thought about it. The slightly scruffy princess asked if it was possible. She really wanted to see it. A little later, the carriage was harnessed, and the princess was peacefully snoring in it. The countess asked her son if he was taking the carriage to show his wife the city. Eric confirmed and said that it would just be a short walk for a change. Since Miesa was sleeping at the time, Taliesa was worried that she might be scared when she woke up. The girl might think that her husband was taking her away to an unknown place. The Viscount replied that he would be there all the time. But the concerned countess nevertheless suggested taking Gela with her, since it would be easier to take care of her highness together. His Grace replied that he could handle it himself, but the mother, with her hand on her heart, said that it would make her feel better. The son had to reluctantly agree. The carriage entered the town square. The maid got out of the cab. The Viscount said that they would go away for a short time and return in 3 hours. The girl looked puzzled. She was glad to have a break, of course, but Eric noticed her expression and asked if she had anything to say. Hella said no. Milord said fine, and they would see each other later. The carriage set off, and the girl, watching it go, hoped that everything would be all right with the young lady. As soon as they drove away, Chladni whispered in his wife's ear that she could now get up. Miesa began to look at everything through the window with delight. It was incredible. Beautiful buildings, busy streets, shops, customers. Everything is as Gela said. There are really many people in the city. The Viscount pointed to a white building on the hill. He said that it was the temple where their wedding took place. The princess replied that she did not remember because of the sedative. The man thought sadly that his wife had never left the house in her right mind. He sat her on his lap so she could see everything better. For him, these were all ordinary things, but for his wife, they seemed amazing. Resting his chin on her head, Eric wondered how she saw the world. Although he was curious, it was best not to disturb her right now. The husband hoped that today would become a good memory for her, which she would cherish for a long time. Miesa pointed to this cart and asked what it was. Milord explained that it was used to bring and sell goods. They were usually not of the best quality. The princess remarked that even if Chladni thought the quality was bad, the product could still be useful. Eric asked again in surprise. He began to explain. The people who were supposed to hunt and farm had been away for 12 years because of the war, and now they were back. Therefore, it was necessary to quickly obtain food for 17,000 people. Some time ago, when the Viscount was working at night with documents, and Miesa, sitting on his knees, kept looking through the documents. She was turning over the thoughts in her little head. Then serious changes happened to her. Chladni found this situation a little strange. The girl, who asked a lot of questions because she didn't know basic things, managed to read rather complex documents. It was as if she was up to the standards of the royal court. Perhaps she had misunderstood the food problem at the time. The Viscount continued to say that because of the war, merchants had reduced the volume of supplies, and taxes had increased. Therefore, there was a temporary shortage of funds. But now this problem has been solved. Now people can earn a living, and there shouldn't be any problems with harvesting. From her slightly detached look, Eric decided that she did not understand what he was saying, or that she was missing something. He added that his parents do not like luxury, so the estate is furnished rather modestly. But now there are 3 iron mines in the area, and trade has resumed through the northern ports. Besides, the fur of the blue fox, which is caught on the borders, brings in huge profits. The man ran his fingers through his hair. He realized that he had talked too much. His Grace asked him to forget everything he had just said. His wife asked why. The Viscount wondered why he had done this, as if he was trying to impress his beloved by bragging about his wealth. He replied that he had unwittingly made her worry, and then he asked if she was comfortable in the estate. The princess said she was comfortable. She just thought that because of the shortage of food, she would have nothing to eat, so she left some food. If she had known that this was the case, the girl would have simply eaten as much as she could. The husband was shocked. A few minutes later, Eric ordered the carriage to be stopped. He got out of the cab and ordered the driver not to move away from it and not to open the doors. The driver replied that he would do everything as the master said. Miesa remained in the carriage and lay down on the sofa. The husband said there would be a cafe at the nearest intersection. He promised to buy her some desserts, but she needed to stay here. It turns out he wasn't poor. It's funny to even think about it. When the princess was little, they lived in Celia's small palace. One day, she was sent to the central palace. There, everyone looked down on her. Although she was always treated like an animal, part of her was proud that she was a member of the royal family. After all, the princess had nothing else. But Miesa found the ordinary life she dreamed of when she stopped belonging to this family. The marriage she had so dreaded gave her a quiet, peaceful life in a good place. People noticed the carriage, noticing the Chladni family coat of arms on it. So the girl quickly pulled the curtain. People were discussing the Viscount who had entered the store. Some said that they had not had time to get a good look at him, and others that he was tall. Some were delighted to see the aristocrat so close, and they also said that it was the first time he had appeared in public since being appointed successor. Those who saw him on his wedding day claimed that the young master was different from other members of the family, who were famous for their outstanding appearance. Listening to all these conversations, the princess tried to understand what outstanding and completely different meant. Women said he was an incomparably handsome man, so handsome that it took people's breath away when they saw him. They then discussed how if he had not changed the situation at the last moment, the war would have been lost. Then only ashes would remain of their homes. It's scary to even think about it. The Viscount is a war hero. Only now did Miesa understand why people praised her husband so much, why they had such happy faces. This is what they call trepidation. Then the women began to whisper. Words were said that they could be executed for insulting the royal family. Some saw something on the wedding day. People guessed the Viscount knew about her condition, but the wedding ceremony took place anyway. The man left the store. People were glad that they had managed to see him at least once. Miesa noticed that when he left, one fact remained the same. In the cheering crowd, two people had gloomy expressions on their faces, but she was already used to such things. Because except for Eric, everyone looked at her like that. The door opened, and the Viscount got into the carriage with a large box. There was not an ounce of worry on his face. He said that there were many people in the street. His Grace chose a lot of things. That's why the box turned out so big. The princess thought that her husband was used to being greeted warmly, but now, because of her, he had attracted unnecessary attention to himself. She didn't want to admit it. For her, this marriage was not a happy one, but for this man, it was a tragedy. She felt sorry for him, and the girl regretted that it happened that way. But she lived her whole life abandoned and unneeded. So, it is not known who should feel sorry for whom. Eric unpacked the box at this point and said that he had been recommended to take these cakes. In the South, they are eaten with salted cream on top. Mies asked if it was halet tarty. The husband confirmed it. Then the girl said she didn't want it and turned away. She asked to put them back in the box. She doesn't like things like that. Her Highness wondered why her husband was so kind to her. She was making his life miserable, ignoring his sincerity. The princess was sure that he would get angry now, but Eric looked at her piercingly and asked what had happened while he was gone. Miesa somehow unnaturally shouted that she had already said that she simply didn't like it. Chladni took her gently in his fingers and lifted her chin a little so he could see her eyes. He said that he didn't care whether she threw away the desserts or not, but now his wife's behavior is very different from before. That's why he asks what happened while he was away. Taking her face in his palms, he added that he had been watching her for a long time, and she was a more reasonable person than anyone thought. She never fussed, and there was always a reason for her actions. And if she behaves like this, then there must be a reason for it. The princess was surprised. Usually she was just shouted at or ignored. But he continues to watch her, trying to understand her. Miesa seemed to freeze. Her husband called her name, but she did not react, and somehow, in an instant, went completely limp in his arms. Eric hugged his wife. She pretended to faint. She was in pain from the realization of what she had done. Even though they kept each other on a leash, he was the only one who knew her secret. In this situation, it was necessary to enlist his support, but she behaved like a child. The princess understood that she was simply used to being treated well. In her position, there is no time to waste on meaningless emotions and pride. Pressing herself against his chest, Her Highness called herself an idiot. She needed to behave well around this man, so she decided that when they got home, she would smile at everything he said. She caught one look at his expression and decided that he was angry. Usually, no matter what she did, his face was always soft. Gela opened the carriage door. She said that she had returned. As she climbed inside, the girl noticed how dark it was. She asked what had happened and why all the curtains were drawn, but she never received an answer. When they returned to the estate, the Viscount saw his father's carriage. So he was leaving the estate again and going to his passion. Still clutching his wife, Eric said he would go first. As he stepped out of the carriage, he remembered Adele's words. She said that loyalty to family was showing blind and unconditional loyalty. He wondered why he remembered those words now. He headed for the Count's carriage, but it had already set off. His Grace thought that now his father was not even saying goodbye. The man thought about how at times he caught himself thinking that the burden of being a successor weighed on him. All decisions concerning the family must be justified and rational. The only question is whether the father thinks so too. There is some truth in what Adele says. Sooner or later, the rotten part will have to be cut off. Gela got out of the carriage with the princess in her arms. She asked what to do with the box of desserts. The Viscount replied that she could keep them for herself, as his wife did not like that sort of thing. Then, taking his wife into his arms, he asked her if she knew how to use daggers. The girl was surprised. She wanted to say that she couldn't, but it seemed better not to lie to him. So she said that she was good at handling them. The commander replied that it was fine and, turning around, headed towards the estate. Gela remained standing near the carriage, trying to understand what the question was about. Imperial maids watched the couple from the window. Malika said that looking at them, you would never guess that they had entered into an intimate relationship. Diala chuckled in response and suggested that maybe he liked them like that. Otherwise, he wouldn't be seen with her in public. And he even gave her a gift. Long glanced angrily at them and replied that it made no difference. Even if they had not yet entered into an intimate relationship, this could change at any moment. Eric carried his wife into the bedroom and laid her on the bed, having first removed the cape. She seemed to be sleeping peacefully. He quietly called her and stroked her hair. The girl opened her eyes in fear. The man apologized and said that this time she really did fall asleep. He suggested not to worry and to sleep some more, and His Grace will tell him to prepare dinner for them. The princess grabbed his hand and, pressing it to herself, asked if he was angry with her. The husband was surprised. Her Highness remembered that he liked to hear stories about her. Miesa said that her mother was actually from the south, from Galieta. She was the third wife and the last of the deceased. Eric replied that he was sorry. He tried to find out, but each time the information was different. So it turns out that, unlike the other wives of the king, this one was from a simple family. Unfortunately, the king died after Misa was born, so no one cared about the unfortunate child. And then they settled them in a palace, where she lived like a rat. When Vermel came of age, he began killing all his relatives on his mother's side. Rivers of blood flowed. That's why there was no information about the last queen. The Viscount asked, "That's why she doesn't like anything that reminds her of the past." The princess confirmed. Eric lowered his head and noted with regret that he had indeed done something stupid. He asked her to tell him a little about herself, about what she loves, what she hates. This will be useful for her, and he will be protected from mistakes in the future. Miesa pressed his palm to her cheek and said that it was good, but she was still grateful to him. It was always better to be honest. Her husband looked at her intently and noticed that there was something else. For some reason, she thought that he might be angry with her. Eric asked why she suddenly got angry with him in the carriage. The girl became embarrassed and began to mumble in response that this was all that had happened before. The man asked again what all this was. Then he closed his eyes and said that he didn't know. And anyway, he thought that Madame Miesa pretended to fall asleep. Chladni narrowed his eyes. He hadn't thought his wife would let her guard down so quickly. The Viscount playfully grabbed her nose and patted her a little. It was okay that she hadn't opened up to him completely yet. But something was still bothering him. According to his observations, his wife has a habit of avoiding everything. It seems that she pretends not to notice the memories that are deeply hidden inside her. And it seems that she is not even aware of them herself. In that case, what happened in the carriage could be a prelude. Growing up on the battlefield, Eric saw countless numbers of survivors and the dead. And even well-trained adults often went crazy in an instant because of the consequences. Miesa's behavior, up until now, had been so reserved and sometimes shameless, so he didn't pay attention to it. But perhaps the princess's pent-up emotions may one day burst out. A few days later, the Viscount was putting his wife to bed after dinner. The girl said that today's food was very tasty. She liked the pork tenderloin, and Her Highness would like to eat it again. Eric replied that he would inform the kitchen. He looked into her huge eyes, then kissed her forehead. The conversations they had had over the past few days had not been very meaningful. Miesa said that she liked sunny weather, but today the sun was too strong, so she could not play outside for long. She doesn't like that she can't stay in the garden for long. The man looked at his half-asleep wife, then he lightly touched her face with his. The girl asked if that was all. His Grace thoughtfully replied that he did not know. His first attachment to the opposite sex confused him. If the princess breaks things and behaves aggressively, it is his responsibility to protect her and take care of her. So that's not the problem. The real problem is the unfamiliar emotion that is beyond his control. Leaves Eric feeling confused because he doesn't know where this is going. He leans back on the pillow and asks if she has any other stories. Because the stories she is telling now, a wife could share with a stranger. Miesa replied that she didn't know what to talk about with strangers. After all, the only person she talked to was him. Chladni covered his eyes with his hand. It was stupid. What was he worried about, leaving a man who stuttered because he was so nervous? The man turned to her and asked her to talk about their last walk. He asked if there had been more to the day. His Grace did not ask because she did not want to talk about it. He thinks about what she went through herself. Eric knew his wife must be struggling with complicated and complex emotions. She couldn't hide these feelings from him. That was a good sign. The husband was sure that Miesa hid them well from others. The girl asked why he was kind to her. Milord replied, because she was now a member of the Cladni family. The princess repeated the word family. The man confirmed that they were now family. In any case, since they are a family, the wife can rely on him as much as she wants, and also show her true feelings at any time. Intertwining their fingers and touching his forehead to hers, Eric asked only two things: to be faithful to him. That was very important. And secondly, she must remember that they are on the same side. As he is, so she is. Miesa looked up at him and asked if it wasn't an obvious story. She thought they were holding each other by a leash, but she said out loud that perhaps her meaning and his were different. His Grace brushed the hair from her face. He said he hoped that someday their meaning would be the same. Then he pulled his wife close and kissed her forehead. Eric said that she was probably tired, so let her sleep. He hadn't hugged her like that for a long time. Pressing herself against his chest, Miesa thought that her husband was sincerely trying. The husband is a good man only because he treats her well on the outside. Maybe he is the same on the inside too. The next day, the couple were going back to the city. The Countess came out to see them off to the carriage. She asked them to be careful. Telisa wished her daughter-in-law luck in sightseeing. The girl, who was in her husband's arms as usual, hooted something in response. Adele watched the proceedings with seriousness. As the carriage drove away from the estate, she asked if everything would be all right. After all, the young master is also a man. Perhaps there is no point in keeping such a young girl near him. The Countess asked what she was talking about. The maid replied that it would be better to place a lady from a respectable family as a servant to the young mistress than such a girl. Taliesa was surprised by her maid's thoughts. She noticed that her daughter-in-law began to look cute and beautiful when she gained a little weight, although she is still thin. So the mistress asked to check in the kitchen what the princess likes to eat. Last time she noticed that she liked butter. The head maid looked strangely sideways at her mistress, but promised to do everything. Late in the evening, Eric, in his dressing gown, reread the reports at his desk. One of the documents said that today the maid Malika was seen in the pawn shop. She sat quietly for a while. The man threw his head back and frowned, his thoughts focused on what she was planning. There was still no news from Crispin. The Viscount was distracted by a slight rustling sound. Looking up, he saw his wife standing at the exit of the bedroom. Cladni asked her if she could sleep. Then he suggested that she sit on his lap, as before. Miesa answered negatively. She will speak from there. The girl hesitated a little, and then said that she had thought about it. She no longer hates Eric. The husband was speechless for a few seconds. After a pause, he asked again in surprise. The princess confirmed that there were none. My lord rose abruptly from his chair and slapped his palm on the table, mimicking her phrase. I've been thinking. Then, approaching her, he asked her what she had decided, that she no longer hated, and that was all. Miesa cringed a little. She asked if he was angry. The man answered sharply that no, he was not angry. He took her hand in his with one hand and touched her face with the other. Eric asked why she hated him. Was it really his touch that was unpleasant to her? The girl replied that she had not. The Viscount, looking down, asked if he should be concerned about how hesitant she sounded. He hoped that he had explained to her last time why he was so kind to her. Misa replied that it was not that she was annoyed, but that she thought it was unnecessary. The husband replied that perhaps she had a point. He thought that if he had crossed the line, the situation would have become irreparable. Stroking her fingers, Eric said that he was glad that now she was not disgusted or uncomfortable. Afterwards, he thanked me for telling him right away and sharing my feelings. The princess smiled and replied that nothing of the sort. Then she asked him what he had been doing. The husband replied that he had to check something. Miesa tried to look around his back and see what was on the table. Cladni said she could look if she wanted. Her Highness approached the table. The husband asked only not to tear the documents on the left. The girl replied that it was fine, and that it was no longer necessary. The lady quickly looked through document after document. It was the first time Eric had seen her read. He was surprised that she did it so quickly. He suggested that perhaps she was more accustomed to reading than talking. Mies asked if he had put Malika under surveillance. Her husband confirmed it. Perhaps he imagined it, but she frowned. Pointing to one of the lines, the princess asked why it was written about the Seliches. She believed that this family had disappeared. Eric replied that he had heard that the last leader had an illegitimate child and that he had survived. They said that he would inherit the family. The girl nodded understandingly. She said she was done. Then she asked if he would show her if she wanted to see it again. Chladni replied that, of course. Misa asked if he had any other business. Her husband replied that he did. Then she said that she would sit on his lap. The princess sat down and rested her hand on his bare chest. The man noticed that there was nothing interesting here, but Her Highness put her arms around his neck and asked if people kissed outside of bed. She went on to add that, thinking about it now, she felt that not only did she no longer hate him, but that she actually liked her husband. So she suggested, "Why don't they?" Eric at this time ran his finger along her lips down to her chin, and then, pressing a little on it, pulled her head back. He asked what this time. Then, holding her by the back of the head, he pushed his wife over backwards. The man noticed that her acting skills were very weak, so let her tell the truth, what she thought up, if she behaves like that. Miesa replied that she was telling him honestly about what she felt. She was just trying to get the reward she had been promised. The Viscount thought for a second and then said that she had earned it. And he kissed her passionately. The princess wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back. Eric pulled away after a while and asked if that was the only reason to engage in intimate relations. The girl reminded him that if he continued to be so cautious, the king would definitely punish him. My lord took her hands by the wrists and replied that this would not happen. The king had let them go last time, so he would not punish them again under the same pretext. Miesa asked why. Her husband replied that if he did so, he would be forced to admit that his previous decision was wrong. Now the princess understood why he had been so calm all this time, and yet she had been sincerely worried about him. Chladni wanted to end this conversation, but the girl asked him to wait a minute. She understood that this was not important now. After all, the king will still find a reason to get rid of her husband. So while he is still alive, Misa must do something. The chances that her next husband will be as kind to her as Eric was are very slim. Therefore, it is better to enter into this marriage in order to spend the rest of your life peacefully in Celia's palace. The princess tried to untie the tight belt of his robe, but she couldn't. The Viscount closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and exhaled. Then, taking her by the shoulders, he asked his wife why she was behaving like that. The lady did not understand her feelings. She felt hurt because she was the only one who was going through all this time, or she was angry because her husband continued to do useless things. He kept finding excuses not to touch her body, so she angrily replied, "What reason is needed for that?" Then she asked him to tell her honestly if he liked her body. If not, then he could just close his eyes. She wondered if her husband was so disgusted that he couldn't have sex. Misa was still sitting on his lap. She remembered that she had promised to just smile sweetly at him. But for some reason, unnecessary emotions kept surfacing. Eric replied that she was talking nonsense. He asked what he meant by not liking her body. The lady believed that her body could not satisfy her husband. It was skinny and ugly, and there were many scars on it, and Eric was a rare handsome man. The Viscount carried the princess to the bed, and standing in front of her, he began to untie his belt. He threw off his robe and stood before her with a naked torso. His body was covered in sculpted muscles. Misa thought that since there were so many rumors about his beauty, surely looks mattered. Milord sat down on the bed and hovered over his wife. He said that regarding scars, he had many of them too. Touching one of the wounds on his chest, the princess asked who had done it. Her husband replied that Captain Shadat had left it. Pointing to a scar on his stomach, the man continued to say that it was left by an axe several years ago. The lady thought that without clothes, his body looked bigger, and it was a little scary. Holding himself up with his arms outstretched, Eric wondered if perhaps she didn't like his body now either. The princess stuttered a little and replied that she liked it. But her husband said that she was lying because she had just looked away. Well, even if it was, it didn't matter anymore. and he started kissing her neck. Moaning in pleasure, Miesa felt a strange burning sensation that made her body tense. She continued to make sounds that came out of her mouth. His kisses were not disgusting or unpleasant to her, and this seemed even stranger. The girl didn't notice how she was left without clothes. Without stopping caresses, Eric quietly warned that now it might hurt. He had only planned to prepare her today, but since everything was going this way, then so be it. The Viscount warned her that from now on, no matter what he did, she should not be too frightened and should not tell him to stop. The princess replied that she understood. She regretted her words soon after. He never crossed the line that night. However, she felt more agitated than usual. The next day, Eric met with the people who had been following Malika. They reported that the maid had visited the pawn shop. The woman was wearing a hooded cape and appeared to be hiding something in her pocket. It was small in size, so the blonde was unable to see it. He remained to watch the pawn shop, and the brunette went after the maid to make sure that she returned to the estate alone. Then he went back to the pawn shop. The men asked if the gentleman had received the report they had sent through the butler. Eric confirmed it. Then, closer to sunset, a rented carriage drove up to the pawn shop. An old woman got out and entered the premises, so they continued to watch further. A few minutes later, the moneylender threw the old woman out. It seemed she was haggling over the sale of a brooch. One of them, just in case, followed the old woman and found out where she lived. The man handed the Viscount a piece of paper with an address. She lived in a small house on the outskirts. To Chladni, this address seemed familiar, so now we need to find out what connects them. The palace maids, Crispin, the old woman, and his father's mistress. Eric entered the princess's bedroom. She was still lying in bed, and Gela was reading a book to her. The man asked if she had worked hard today. Miesa immediately turned away, and the maid, closing her book, rose from her chair to greet the master. The Viscount asked if she had anything she wanted to say. The girl asked if he was planning to go for a walk with the young lady today. Milord wondered why she was asking. Hela replied that the palace maids had come earlier. After examining the princess, they noticed that the gentleman had finally become close. This was good news. Then they asked if she would accompany the young master and the princess on a walk. Gela corrected them that Miesa was not a princess, but a young lady, and then she added that only the young master knew about it, to which the maids remarked that it seemed the princess enjoyed the walks. Her complexion had improved considerably. The medic was angry that they were calling her a princess again. From this, she concluded that Malika was trying to test her. That's why the girl is worried about what they are up to. Eric agreed that it was a trap, and they were clearly planning something. So as he left the room, he suggested that they pretend to fall for it. Gela asked what he sent. A few minutes later, the milord returned and brought her a belt with a dagger attached. The girl asked what she needed it for. The Viscount replied that Cullen would show her how to use it. Today, she has to get off the carriage again and walk around, and then come back. Let the medic keep in mind that the bodyguard will follow her. Gela replied that she understood. A little later, when Eric was helping the princess put on her vest armor, she asked if it was for protection. The husband replied that yes. Although he would be nearby and the knights of the family would also accompany them, he would feel more at ease if she wore this. Mies sat there embarrassed after last night. She couldn't even look him in the eye. The lady asked whether the vest would protect her from a dagger, a whip, or an axe. Chladni asked why she was saying such terrible things. He began to explain that as for the whip, it would depend on whether it had spikes. Armor would protect against a dagger, but an axe was dangerous. Having fully completed the lacing, Eric said it was done. Then he asked if the vest was too much of a hindrance. Putting on a dress on top, Miesa replied that everything was fine. It was also important that she put on a bib. Her husband asked what it was. The wife explained that he needed to put it on her like a necklace, and then tie the ribbon at the back. Holding the bib in his hands, the Viscount remembered seeing her wear it and wondered if she liked jewelry. Eric glanced at her bare neck in the neckline of her dress. Touching his chin thoughtfully, the man said that he wasn't very good at tying ribbons, but he would try to do it as best he could. He brushed the hair off his back and began tying the ribbons. He hoped that all these precautions would not be necessary. As the Viscount had hoped, nothing happened along the way. The journey passed calmly, as on any other day. The couple sat hugging each other in the carriage and watched the landscapes float by. It seemed that today's walk would end without incident. But everything turned upside down when they saw Gela return. Her clothes were torn in places. She was holding her bleeding hand and had small cuts on her cheek and other hand. The girl threw her leg over and began to climb into the carriage. The Viscount asked if she was hurt. The maid replied that it was a little, but her pride was hurt the most. Still holding the wound on her hand, she said that it was all because of Sir Cullen Emmons. Brothers Cullen and Valak hate being addressed by their last name, because in the language of the Principality of Sadat, it sounds like an obscene word. Gela, of course, knew this very well. She began to tell how everything had started as usual. She looked at the local herbs, then went into a bookstore, then bought a snack, where she ran into a bandit. As he passed by, the man deliberately pushed her roughly. The girl began to get indignant, and then noticed that her wallet was missing. Shouting out that a pickpocket had stolen her purse, Gela chased after him. The guy lured her into a dark alley. There were several more waiting for her there. The larger one had a club, and the smaller one a dagger. Although they were all weak and puny, there were still 4 of them. The maid realized with bitterness that she had fallen for such an obvious trick. Some of them had rotten teeth and smelled as if they had been dipped in a sewer. Chladni raised his hand, stopping her. He asked her not to go into such details. The girl nodded in agreement. Anyway, she overheard their conversation. It turned out that they didn't just want to beat her up. At first, they tried to intimidate her with words and actions. They said that if she didn't want to get hurt, then she should behave well. But Gela did not listen to them and struck first, knocking out one of the attackers. The bandits planned to kidnap her and take her away. One of them, who was behind, even tried to put a bag over her head. But the girl managed to put him down too. In fact, if she had let them kidnap her, she might have found out who was behind it. But the maid just couldn't resist. My lord said there was no need for that. He asked if she had been able to find out everything on the spot. Gela replied that she knew perfectly well where and how to cut to achieve the effect. Handing out blows left and right, she thought there were 4 of them, but it was strange that while she was picking them off one by one, no one attacked her from behind. But when she turned around, she saw Cullen holding 2 of the bandits. It turned out that he was simply pushing them towards her one by one. She was, to put it mildly, amazed. While Gela was dealing with these guys, the bodyguard mumbled numbers. He said 18 and then corrected it to 17. At first, she thought he was naming the amount the girl could handle, but the numbers kept going down. The Viscount explained that this meant that she was as good as his brother had been at 16. This calculation irritated her terribly at the time. My lord added that it might be a little strange, but this was Cullen's way of expressing his admiration. Then he asked what happened next. The girl said that when she knocked them all down, the warrior asked her why she needed a dagger if she was just going to fight, to which Gela replied that it would be useful for interrogation. Seeing that 2 of them were still conscious, she began the interrogation. Eric stopped her. He noticed that his wife, sitting on his lap, had her face covered with her hands. He assumed that it was hard for her to hear such things, but removing her hands, Miesa laughed, surprising her husband. The medic asked if everything was okay. His Grace asked her to continue. After the girl had dealt with the bandits properly, they admitted that they were from some kind of thieves' guild, but according to Cullen, they were even kicked out from there. Chladni suggested that they were simply used. Gela confirmed it. The bandits didn't know who was behind it. They said they were promised money. She found out their task was to kidnap her. The plan was to hold her and use her to discredit her, and then, after she became pregnant, deliver her to the Count's estate. The Viscount said sympathetically that she had been through a lot. He had an idea who might be behind it. The girl replied that it was hard. Her wrist still hurt. So she asked if there would be a risk premium. My lord said it wasn't something that could be solved with money. Hela replied that she had taken her revenge on them, so she had no regrets. Eric said he heard she was saving money to buy a forge in her hometown. The girl confirmed it. Because of a competitor, father's business is going badly. Chladni said it would take a few weeks, but he would buy it with his own money. Gela even opened her mouth in surprise. She asked again with bated breath what it meant. Eric replied that she would have the title deed in hand early next month. The girl couldn't believe her luck. She was profuse in her gratitude. Then she remembered and said that she would go with Sir Cullen because she was covered in dirt. The medic left the carriage happily. Miesa was surprised at how low these people had fallen. The husband replied that they planned to use the girl to draw him into a scandal. Remembering the words of the palace maids, the princess told her husband that they considered Gela his mistress. Eric clutched his head wearily. He asked if his wife was okay. She asked again. The man explained that he meant all this talk about torture, that she probably didn't like it, and also that smell of blood. The princess replied that when she first saw blood, she was very scared. She was a child then. She even had nightmares, but now she's used to it, so she's fine. The Viscount asked her if she had seen it often. The girl replied that she was more afraid that she would start laughing out loud. Later, she had to be among the victims of what happened. Miesa remembered that she was about 12 years old when people started to think she had finally gone crazy. So it was easy, but about 2 years ago, the maids began to suspect that she was in her right mind. Because by that time, everyone who was supposed to die had died, so there was no longer any possibility of being among the dead. So she had to come up with different things to keep up the farce. Eric was afraid to even imagine what his wife had to go through as a child, and what it cost her. The princess said she did well. When she started doing crazy things, people who doubted her quickly shut their mouths. Everyone believed in her game. Chladni wondered if she could talk about it so easily. Then why was she so afraid of birds, and why she couldn't go into the church? So he asked if there was anything else she was afraid of or didn't like. She hesitated. The husband, noticing this, said that it was okay if she didn't want to talk about it. No need to force yourself. He hugged her tighter and pressed her to himself. After a while, Miesa quietly said that she didn't like talking about her childhood. She didn't want to remember it, not even the happy moments. Eric asked if he could ask why. Touching his face and looking into his eyes, the lady said it was a big secret. So my lord would have to reward her handsomely. She asked how about finishing where they had left off last night. Even now, when the princess thinks about it again, it is hard for her. Her childhood in the palace of Celia was full of happy memories. When little Miesa managed to beg an extra candy from the maids, her mother scolded her and said that she was disobeying again. The maids also got it, as they gave the princess an extra candy. The girls apologized with laughter. Although that place cannot be compared in beauty with the central palace, her mother was there, sometimes strict, but still, her loving mother. The little girl tried to hide behind the maid's skirts. The mother tried to catch her, threatening her with all the punishments of heaven for not obeying. When the empress caught her, she hugged the child to herself with a laugh, and Miesa spat out the candy. The woman cheerfully noted that she had warned of punishment, after which everyone laughed for a long time. All the people in that place, looking at the princess, smiled warmly. It happened that a courtier, who carried out the king's orders, would come and whisper something secret in the mother's ear. On such days, her mood remained gloomy, which worried the girl very much. After his next visit, Miesa had a bad feeling. The maids tried to take her away. It began to rain. Everyone in the palace had a gloomy face. Perhaps the rain somehow predicted her future. Mom used to say that a goddess always comes to naughty children whenever it rains. That day, it seemed as if a fairy tale goddess had descended from the heavens to punish the princess. Thunder rumbled, tearing the sky apart, and its roar echoed throughout the palace. That same day, Vermel invaded Celia's palace. She was very scared. Incessant screams could be heard from outside the windows. The empress tried to hide the baby. She said that her mother had done something wrong and that she should be punished. Miesa begged her mother to hide together. She didn't want her mother to be scolded. That day, everyone in the palace died. Mom finally said that the little girl must survive, no matter what. She ordered to hide among the fallen and pretend to be crazy. She assumed that she wouldn't have to hide for long. The princess later wondered why her mother had told her to survive at any cost. Perhaps she thought that her brother would soon be dethroned. As time went on, Miesa began to consider her words irresponsible and selfish. She was just an 8-year-old child who didn't know how to survive. But she managed to save her life in the end. The girl tried very hard to survive. She admitted to Eric that she never thought she had survived that day due to her luck. On the contrary, she thought it was a punishment from the goddess for not listening to her mother. From then on, every day was a suffering for her. Therefore, after this, Miesa firmly believed that she had to fulfill her mother's last will, either hide among the fallen or pretend to have gone crazy. Melting from her husband's caresses, the girl still could not forget how, during the first few months, when she fell asleep in the main hall, she was very scared. She probably really wasn't herself. It seemed like her brother had simply decided to let her live. For some time, she constantly thought about her mother and was very depressed. But then, at some point, the girl could not cry anymore. Her mother was a very kind and caring person. While braiding her hair, she told her that she chose her name herself. The princess asked if her name had any special meaning. Mom suggested looking at the shape of her lips. To pronounce her name, the lips must stretch into a smile. The empress gave her daughter such a name so that every person would smile when pronouncing it. All the people around will surely make the princess happy. Eric never stopped loving her, shouting her name. After caresses, her husband pressed her with his body. Having caught his breath, he pulled back a little and kissed her forehead. A bitter tear rolled down from her eyes. She remembered the king's servant asking her if she had a name. Better to be an animal than a human who found herself in such a state. To be humiliated in front of the man who killed your mother. Then he grabbed the child and dragged him across the floor. Having dragged her to the king, he said that some rat was constantly hanging around here and getting in the way. Then the maids forced her to drink, complaining that she had spilled everything again. Then they treated her roughly and called her vile. The emperor sat at a distance and seemed to enjoy her humiliation, paying almost no attention to it. The morning rays found the spouses lying in an embrace on the bed. Eric woke up and admired his sleeping wife. The fact that she was fast asleep in his arms already brought him great pleasure. Besides the story he had told her last night, there were many other things he wanted to ask her. As he gently brushed the hair away from her face, he simply hoped that while she was opening up, she wouldn't develop new scars on her heart. The Viscount kissed the sleepy princess first on the forehead, then on the cheek. The girl began to wake up. Eric hugged her, whispering that his wife should still sleep. She must have been very tired at night. Someone called him quietly from behind the half-open door. He was told that an urgent letter had arrived from the knights, and he had better look at it right now. A little later, the Viscount met with the knights. Moving around the mansion, the warriors reported that they had learned about the family of the Marquise Crispin and found out the identity of the old woman. It turns out that she is the mother of the deputy captain of the Crispin family knights. Chladni thought he had heard of him. He is ruthless and has outstanding skills, but was never able to take the captain's place. For generations, his family had done all the dirty work for the Marquise. His father had been executed for grave misdeeds. There were rumors that they were doing this to cover up the misdeeds of the head of the family. However, he remains loyal to Crispin. One of the knights suggested that for the sake of his future, the deputy captain gave up avenging his father. And it seems that this old woman is connected to the Thieves' Guild. Those who attacked Gela were from the Palsak Guild, and the old woman's brother is said to be their leader. So it turns out that Crispin is somehow involved in this. However, it is unclear what their benefit is. They actively promoted the idea of marriage between their families. They may have sent a woman to the count, and also colluded with the palace maids. In order to discredit Eric, they tried to kidnap Hela. It is unknown whether Crispin wanted the position of heir to the Chladni family or their downfall. No matter how much the Viscount thought, he could not understand what benefit the Marquis would derive. My lord looked back and asked Cullen to report their latest movements later. The man replied that he understood, and his grace was also worried by the fact that they had obtained this information in just a few days. As if everything was lying on the surface. The question then arose as to why it had not been possible to reveal, for such a long time, who was behind the woman from the tavern. Something didn't add up. There was no logic to their actions. It was even possible that this wasn't Crispin's doing. The reason they agreed to marry was because of infidelity. That's where it all started. But maybe it was all just a decoy. The Lord's thoughts were interrupted by a boy servant. He reported that his wife had woken up. Eric replied that he would come right away. If you think about the fact that Crispin was chosen to be used, as was Chladni, then it means that someone else is behind it. And only one person comes to mind, His Majesty Emperor Vermal. In the bedroom, the palace maids bent over the lying princess. They were surprised by something, pointing at the girl's body. Mies lay with her eyes closed and did not move. She knew they were still watching. The women noted that this should certainly be enough once Malika reported everything to the king. The maids were glad that it happened just in time. The princess needed to be prepared. The girl tensed up when she heard this. Diala brought many different pieces of jewelry in boxes, as well as many different bottles of perfume and cosmetics. Malika asked if her partner had locked the door. She confirmed. They led the princess into the bathroom to the things that were laid out. Long rubbed her shoulder. She grumbled that they got rid of the maid, but now the knights were giving her no peace. One of them grabbed her arm and began interrogating her. Malika said to hold Miesa tighter, because it would be difficult if she started to kick. The princess tried to understand what they were planning. The maid said that from now on, every morning would be like this. Since she had finally caught her husband's attention, she must not lose him. Diala held the princess's hands, and Malika took out the dress. Misa felt like a monkey. Gela hurried to the young mistress's bedroom. She greeted Valak, who was standing at the door. The man noticed that she was late today. The girl replied that she had to stay to treat the wounds. Applying a bandage with one hand turned out to be more difficult than she thought. The bodyguard told her to come in, as the young lady had already woken up. The medic replied that she should hurry then. As they walked, she asked if the princess was alone. Valak replied that she had 2 maids with her. The girl entered the room and did not find the mistress in bed. She looked around, but did not see anyone. Listening closely, Gela heard noise from the bathroom. Malika was looking for a powder compact among the cosmetics scattered on the floor. The woman looked disheveled. She indignantly reminded her partner that she had asked her to hold the princess tighter. Diala apologized, holding the girl tightly. Miesa was surprised that normally she would have been slapped by now. She didn't understand why they were trying to do her makeup. Malika couldn't find a brush to apply lipstick. Finally, having received the ill-fated object, she tried to paint the princess's lips, holding her head. The lady resisted and ruined the brush. She wanted to know what they were up to. Now the maid had to use her finger to apply lipstick. Having fixed the princess's face, Malika tried to paint her lips with her finger. She said that they were in a hurry, so they wanted to finish it quickly. Miesa found it suspicious that they were in such a hurry that they didn't even hit her. No matter how you look at it, it was strange. Gela began to break into the bathroom, calling the young lady. She wondered why the door was locked. The girl asked what they were doing there. Malika wondered why this maid was here. The princess, realizing that her protector was nearby, screamed loudly. Diala immediately covered her mouth with her hand. Gela began to knock on the door even more furiously. She did not understand what was happening. The knocking made her wounded arm hurt. Because of the wound, she could not knock down the door, so she called Sir Valak for help. The palace maids panicked. They didn't know what to do. Diala suggested trying another time, but Malika rudely told her to take her hand away from the princess's mouth. This had to be finished before they went in. The second maid asked what would happen if she screamed, and again suggested trying another day. Long replied that she should just let go. They had an excuse if they asked why they had closed the door. They could say that the lady had tried to escape. At this time, Miesa was thinking about what to do. She understood that even if she tried to escape, they would still catch her. She wouldn't be able to escape anyway, so she decided she just had to stall for time. When Diala released her mouth and the other leaned in to paint her lips, the princess spat in her face. Malika cursed, wiping her face of drool. Her Highness decided that she had already been through a lot, so she would definitely get out this time. The girl looked defiantly into the maid's eyes. The maid was surprised and noticed that she was behaving like a human being. The princess realized that she had made a mistake. So if she now began to avoid her gaze, Malika would definitely suspect something. Miesa closed her eyes, scolding herself for making such a stupid mistake. She knew they had noticed. She was scared and didn't know what to do. The girl hoped that she was just imagining things. But the tall one looked at her angrily and, squinting, said, "Just look at her." On the other side of the door, Gela asked the knight how things were going. The man replied that nothing would work. The door was made of black wood and it wouldn't budge at all. The girl thought that if she went for the key, it would take too much time. But at that moment, there was no other way out. She shouted for Valak to wait for her here, and she would take the key. But then the Viscount entered the room and asked what was going on. Hela replied that those damned maids had locked themselves inside with the young mistress, and they could not open the door. Chladni asked them to step aside and kicked the door with all his might. The force of the kick caused it to fly off. He saw the frightened maids, one holding his wife, the other holding a tube of lipstick. Milord ordered to seize them. Malika asked to wait and listen first. Hela grabbed the long one furiously and asked what she meant by wait. In a couple of seconds, she had the maid on the floor and secured her. The medic asked that since aristocrats bow their heads before the king, commoners cannot treat them like that. Malika said in a strangled voice that she was crazy. The maid couldn't treat her like that. Eric ran up to his wife and asked if she was hurt. Then he pulled her close and hugged her tightly. He whispered to her that everything was okay now. Mayessa was shaking all over. But the familiar scent, his warmth, made her feel safe. She wanted him to hold her close and never let go. The man picked up his wife and headed for the exit. Malika shouted that he couldn't just leave. Then she added that the princess had been pretending all this time, and she had fooled everyone. Everyone had fallen for her trick. The Viscount looked back and, turning to Gela, asked her to shut up. The girl happily interrupted her speech, using her belt. But the maid continued to mutter that the princess had been of sound mind all this time. Eric tried to calm Mayessa, who was shaking in his arms. He said that he would sort everything out so that she wouldn't worry. After taking his wife to a safe place, a little while later, Chladni gathered the knights. They handed him the tube of lipstick that Malika was holding in her hands. The Viscount examined the jar. It seemed she was trying to put on makeup, as she had red lipstick on her hands. My lord sniffed the mass and said it was strange. When he entered the bathroom, there were traces of a violent struggle everywhere. If Mayessa resisted, there must have been a reason. Gela agreed that something was wrong. She asked for 2 days to study the contents. His Grace did not agree to wait 2 days. He reminded the assistant that she had set a good example. Then he turned to the tied-up Malika. Scooping up some of the mass on his finger, he held it up to the woman and asked if it was regular cosmetics. She fidgeted and widened her eyes. The maid's mouth was opened, and the gentleman said that now they would find out. He ran his lipstick finger across the woman's palate. Then he ordered her mouth to be kept closed so she wouldn't spit it out. The woman began to tremble, and her condition worsened rapidly. After that, she became quiet. Chladni asked Gela to check on her condition. The girl checked her eyes and felt her pulse. After closing her eyes for a second, she reported that she was dead. Eric clenched his fist. The angrier he got, the clearer his mind became. From the looks of it, they were trying to poison him by kissing his wife. An instant death by accident would look too suspicious, so they decided to use this method. Sooner or later, Chladni would have realized that Crispin was behind this, which would have sown enmity between the families. It was unknown how far the king had calculated everything. He will accuse them of neglecting the princess, or accuse Crispin of conspiracy. It will no longer matter. In the end, what the king so desires will happen: the collapse of 2 families. If this is his wish, then Eric will gladly respond in kind. He turned to the second maid and asked how it had happened. The woman, stuttering a little, replied that she didn't know. Malika had simply followed orders. The Viscount narrowed his eyes and asked again. Coming closer to Diali, he noticed that, according to his information, the dead maid had many problems. He asked if that was true. He had heard that she had been stealing jewelry from the palace to pay off her father's debts. She was found out, but she bribed the head maid to cover it up, so he wondered if she did it again for the money. The woman, trembling, replied that it was so. She had told her so herself. My lord asked if Crispin was involved. The maid happily confirmed and said that Malika often met with their maids. The Viscount called Cullen and ordered him to go to the palace and convey that a conflict had occurred between the 2 families. That Crispin, driven by self-interest, tried to harm the young Mrs. Chladni. He then added that from now on, this room would no longer be used. His Grace ordered a room to be prepared on the 3rd floor. Gela was instructed to examine the body and determine the components of the poison. Eric asked the knight if his father had returned. The man replied that he had been sent for, but was not there yet. The gentleman bowed his head wearily. He said that he understood, but first he needed to visit his mother and wife. In the Countess's drawing room, over a cup of tea, Milady was indignant at how the Crispin family had dared to go against them. The woman was terribly angry. The Viscount said that since the palace maid had died, they needed a witness. Adele bit her lip. She knew this would lead to big trouble. Watching her mistress stroke the hair of the princess lying on her lap, She knew it was all because of this woman. Eric continued that soon they would send someone from the palace to confirm Diala's testimony. The countess thought about it. She said that the king could take the maid and falsify the testimony in order to get rid of them, and he would not even listen to the witness. The woman turned to her assistant and asked who was least affected by the king's influence. Adele thought for a moment and then replied that it might be the head of the Salichez Dwight family. My lord asked if this was the one who had recently inherited the title. The maid confirmed. Doit is an illegitimate child, so he knows little about the world and will not be able to stand up to the king, so everything will look plausible. After all, 2 of the 3 pillars of the kingdom would be involved in this matter. The head of the Salichez family was immediately invited to the Claudini mansion. The young man turned out to be a rather outrageous fashionista with dark red hair. Eric shook hands with the only survivor of the Salichez family. He was born as a result of the previous leader's affair with a maid and, by a lucky chance, escaped punishment from the king. As soon as Doit came of age, he came to the palace to inherit the title of duke. While drinking tea in the drawing room, the Viscount thanked the young man for responding to his invitation so quickly. The guy smiled and replied that it was nothing. He wasn't doing anything anyway. He just ate and attended receptions. On the contrary, he was honored that the Claudini family had contacted him. Doit enjoyed his tea, holding his cup with his little finger extended. He asked why no one from the palace had come yet, even though that the princess had almost been hurt. Eric replied that they must be preparing countermeasures. Since this concerns 2 pillars, one must be careful. The boy got the message and beamed. Doit noticed that this no longer concerned the princess, but the young Mrs. Claudini. Then he gasped, because it was all about love. The Viscount said seriously that it was simply a power struggle between families, and that love had nothing to do with it. The Duke quickly placed the cup of drink on the table, spilling some of the liquid. He noticed that perhaps he had expressed himself incorrectly. Due to his lack of education, he often misunderstands things. But let his grace not worry. This time he understood everything. The boy smiled radiantly. Eric thanked God for his understanding. A servant entered the room and announced that a man from the palace had arrived. It was a young man with blonde hair and a military bearing. He asked if everything was all right with the young lady. The representative suggested that she was probably in shock after what had happened. He then asked if she had been there to see Malika die. The Viscount guessed that he was clearly asking for some purpose, but he thanked him for his concern and said that his wife was fine. Still, the expression on the man's face made him wary. Claudini added that given the seriousness of the situation, he had invited Duke Salichez. The man apologized for forgetting to greet them out of confusion. He introduced himself as Tilberig, captain of the Royal Guard. Doit replied that he was pleased to meet him, and he was sorry that he had to meet under such sad circumstances. The men went to the scene of the crime. The room was guarded by 4 knights. Inside, the traces were preserved in their original form. The Duke was a little shocked to see traces of blood. The captain asked where the young lady was now. He expressed hope that she was in good hands. Eric replied that his mother was currently looking after her. Diala, who was in the room, recognized the captain. The man remarked that he had not thought that they would have to meet in such a situation. The maid was surprised that the commander-in-chief of the Royal Knights himself had arrived. The Viscount asked permission to introduce a certain person. He pointed to the maid to whom he had entrusted the care of his wife. Her name was Hela. Tilberig asked what family she was from. My lord replied that she was not of noble birth, but was a member of the knightly order of Claudini. If anything happened to his wife, she would be able to help. The representative noted that this was reassuring. He then expressed a desire to view Malika's body. Sitting down next to the deceased maid, the captain asked if the pose was the same as at the moment of death. Eric confirmed it. Tilburg examined the lips and mouth of the corpse. His lordship said that Gela was at the scene by chance and that the analysis of the composition would take 2 days. The captain sniffed the remains of the composition from his fingers and added that the palace would also conduct an inspection. Then, after thinking for a few seconds, he asked to simply send the results when they were ready. They would check and compare them. Claudini took a deep breath and exhaled, then said, "Let's do it." The spokesman suggested that death was instantaneous. The hands were tied and the jaw was slightly swollen. Eric confirmed and added that not knowing what she might do, they tied her hands for safety. and her jaw became like that after she ate something suspicious. The representative only chuckled in response. He then asked Dial to tell him what had happened. The woman replied that she knew little. Malika acted independently. Perhaps she relied too much on her husband's authority. Diala knew that sooner or later her actions would lead to trouble. She reminded him that Tilberg knew what kind of person she was. Malika stole the princess's jewelry, once even carrying a silver cup out of the palace. She always had bad habits. She should have been caught and banished from the palace long ago. Since they arrived here, the deceased has maintained contact with the Crispin family. Under the pretext that the Marquise's daughter had dropped her handkerchief, their maid secretly met with Malika to discuss everything. The young lady is now 18, so they have 2 years to carry out their plan. They ended up getting something so dangerous that Diala couldn't even imagine. She didn't think they were planning something so outrageous. Taking the jar of lipstick, the captain asked why they had suddenly decided to give the princess, then corrected himself, the young lady, a makeup. The maid hesitated, and then replied that it was because the young master and the princess were quite close. He takes care of her, and they spend a lot of time together. In the morning, the bed is so messy that they blush. Malika said that this would be their excuse. After all, the princess must retain the attention of her husband, whom she had achieved with such difficulty. Doit listened attentively and said thoughtfully that he thought everything was clear. Then he added that it would be fair to hear the evidence of the maid Gela. She looks like she has something to say. The captain agreed, then they turned to Gela to hear her story. The girl replied that what she saw was different from the words of the royal maid. When the gentleman broke down the door, she noticed the young lady struggling to escape. It was Diala who twisted and held her arms. The woman immediately objected and said that she was simply following Malika's instructions. Gela replied that she would not say that she was merely following orders. She asked Wallach to sit down. Then, using him as an example, she showed the position the maid and the princess were in, commenting that Diala was very cruel. She made the young lady sit there like some kind of criminal. The captain turned to his knights and ordered the maid to be taken away. The woman struggled and swore that she had spoken the truth. The Viscount looked suspiciously at Tilberg's actions. He acted as if he was ready to help him. But it was a game. In the evening, Eric returned to his mother's chambers. The woman was sitting on the sofa and hugging her daughter-in-law. She reported that Miesa was very scared and just slept the whole time. The man took his wife in his arms and thanked her for taking care of her. The countess asked how it had all gone. My lord replied that it had gone rather quickly. At least Tilberg had acted sensibly, although some things were alarming. For example, when he asked to send the results, when he asked if the princess was in safe hands. Milady thought about it and also agreed that it was rather strange. She volunteered to find out everything herself and then let them know. She remembered that Adele had said that the second son was in the order. The maid confirmed it. She then added that since he had a bad relationship with his family, it was better to contact him through the Conyard family. Eric said he would think of an excuse to invite him. The butler interrupted their conversation and said that people from the Crispin family had arrived. They insist on meeting with my lord. The Viscount specified that it was now. The butler confirmed. Since they called themselves services, he asked them to wait in the living room. Then he added that they looked suspicious. There are 2 of them, one rather ignorant for a servant and the other in a robe, completely hiding his face. Chladni asked what kind of build they were. The servant replied that the rough man was quite large, and the one in the robe was too small for a man.